Store.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and I'm going to start things off with a comment on previous week's news. The mainstream media are continuing to put out stories about foxes attacking babies and young children. A few weeks ago, I saw on the front page of the Daily Mail the picture of a fox at night climbing over a garden fence where allegedly a child had previously been attacked by a fox. Why this sudden massive increase in evil fox stories? Are foxes really out of control, as our newspapers seem to suggest? It is our view that those in the establishment who wish to re-legalise hunting foxes with dogs are putting these stories on the front pages in order to sway opinion, so that at some point in the near future, when they put forward their proposed change to the law, people are more likely to accept hunting with dogs. These stories are nothing more than a psyops operation. I have no way of knowing whether the stories are genuine. Perhaps they are. But none of them warrant the headlines in the news, British national newspapers, and on BBC main television news. We here on the Starship object to the programming of the public through a controlled British media. If we see in the coming months the government tabling the bringing back of fox hunting, you heard it here first. Kenny McCaskill, who made the decision to release the Lockerbie bomber, has rejected a plea to attend a US Senate hearing. The bomber, Mohammed al-Megrahi, who was convicted in 2001 of killing 270 passengers in 1988 on a Pan Am jumbo, was let out of prison on compassionate grounds because he had cancer and was given just 3 months to live. People are now saying that he could live for 10 years. The request by the Americans for McCaskill to be interrogated about his decision is, of course, total theatre. The real reason why Megrahi was released, which the mainstream media are conveniently ignoring, is that Megrahi's legal team had appealed against the original conviction, and his lawyers have compelling evidence that witnesses lied at the original trial, and that he was framed and is totally innocent. His team is believed to have enough new evidence to overturn the original conviction, which would then cause people to ask the question, who really did blow up the Pan Am jumbo? Some rumours suggest that a certain individual who lost his life on the plane was the target of American intelligence, and that the other 269 murdered passengers were included to disguise their single-targeted individual. If Megrahi had been released because he was innocent, as many people believe he is, this would have been very embarrassing, as a new search for the real perpetrator would begin. So to get round it, they most likely faked his cancer situation in order to avoid the appeal. The Americans now have to keep digging themselves into a deeper hole with more lies, pretending to be annoyed at McCaskill, who was simply a puppet on the end of their evil strings. It's time to introduce this week's guest onto the Starship. And this week, our guest has a degree in psychology and media. He has an MA in film studies. He is also studying hypnotherapy and is the lead guitarist of the band Thought Crime. He has spent the last 10 years researching the subject of mind control and how our perceptions of reality are being purposely constructed by exterior forces. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. It's Neil Saunders.
Hello.
Welcome on the Starship, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Did you enjoy the trip?
Oh, very much so, yes.
Good. Now, we're here to talk about a subject which I'm fascinated by, that of mind control.
Yes.
And we've been discussing it, obviously beforehand, and it's it is a huge subject,
Oh
isn't
yeah,
it?
it's vast, absolutely vast.
So could you start by telling us sort of when would, sort of modern mind control, when did that all start?
Well, I mean, even that is sort of mired in mystery itself. I mean, officially MK Ultra, which is the American mind control project for sort of mind-controlled assassins and Manchurian candidates and things like that. That's
MK Ultra. So why is it called MK
well,
Ultra?
this is where the twist comes in, because the MK comes from a German word for mind control.
Right.
Now, mind and control. And essentially, MK Ultra started under Sidney Gottlieb in 1953. However, basically, it used a lot of techniques that were already in use by Nazis in Auschwitz, Josef Mengele, and such like that. The sort of British arm of mind control would be the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which is ostensibly it's a charity organisation funded by Rockefeller, among other people, that deals with crowd control, applying psychological techniques to society, and how to deal with mass brainwashing, essentially. That started in 1921, and in 1932 the directorship was taken over by a gentleman called Kurt Lewin, who was a German psychiatrist, and later he was taken over to America to start the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA.
Right.
A lot of the techniques were using sort of Operation Paperclip Nazi officers that were brought over to America.
This was after the war.
This was after the war, but obviously this was
Yep.
before 1953. So you could assume that basically the official start date of 1953 was probably not. It was probably going on a lot of time before that.
Right.
In fact, if you wanted to research the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's passages in there that talk about trauma-induced dissociation, using potions to induce comas and spells or hypnotic trance styles to enslave people and essentially make them mind controlled.
Now, the Americans are believed to have used mind control to do with the Korean War.
Well, MK Ultra was a response, officially, it was a response to Korean and Chinese mind control techniques. There was about 7,000 prisoners of war, American prisoners of war during the Korean War, and about 95% of them made full confessions to basically whatever charges were brought against them.
Right. So was this American prisoners or Korean?
This is American prisoners.
American prisoners.
And officially, in 1953, MK Ultra started to try and counteract these Korean brainwashing techniques.
Right.
There was psychiatrist Wolf and Hinkle sent a memo to Alan Dulles in 1953 explaining the Chinese and Korean methods of mind control. And essentially these were using isolation, sensory deprivation, putting people in stress positions so that they can't sleep, battering them with sound, and letting them know that there's no way of getting out of this without confessing to the crime that they're accused of.
So is that what you would term stress-based trauma then? Or?
Yeah, that is essentially stress-based trauma, but it's more using coercive methods and people's wants to be part of a greater whole. What they were doing in the Chinese methods, they would put the prisoners in a cell with several rabid pro-communists who would hate any deviation from the sort of state mandate, and they would let him know with violence and with psychological threats. And essentially, after so many weeks of this, your character becomes moulded to fit the society that you're in. The thing about the Chinese and Korean is that they used no artificial means. It was all to do with human weakness and coercion.
Okay. Now, with people like Mengele in World War II, he was a Nazi who, I believe, went to Argentina after the war.
Yes, yeah.
And his techniques were somewhat more sinister.
Well, basically, he used trauma bonding or trauma. It works like this. If you've ever been in a car crash or you've ever had severe depression or anything like that, you'll find that sometimes you won't remember it. If you were in a car incident, I remember the car swimming out in front of us, and I remember waking up. And what your brain does is it closes off certain parts so that you don't have to relive that trauma again and again and again. Now, if you sort of understand how the brain works, you can manipulate this and you can use it to your own means. What trauma-based mind control is shattering the mind through trauma, making it dissociate into separate compartments like a honeycomb. Now, what you can do is you can basically implant a personality, or make it seem that each of these compartments is a separate personality, completely separate and unaware of the others. And by that you can cause dissociative identity disorder and basically, shatter people.
So Mengele, would you say he was one of the ones who started the trauma-based?
He was certainly,
He worked with twins a lot, didn't he?
Well,
tell us about that. Why did he need to use twins?
Well, I mean, a lot of people would think that it was to do with genetics and things like that, and it certainly was, but it's a way of using a double-blind test. You've essentially got the same genetic material and you can try the same things out against people. Also, basically, twins have got a very, very, very tight connection, and what he would often do is make twins kill their sibling in front of him.
Really?
And yeah, absolutely. And again, this would cause dissociation.
Yeah.
What's really strange about Joseph Mengele is that he was so successful that he introduced this thing called trauma bonding, which is like a sort of Stockholm syndrome. Many, many years later, even today, survivors of his horrendous techniques will refer to him as Beautiful Joseph. They won't hear a word against him. They think of him as their saviour.
And did he use any medical techniques, do you know?
Yeah, well, he was experimenting with, drugs, barbiturate-induced comas. They basically ran the whole gamut, and this was available to them because obviously they were at places like Auschwitz where they had a regular supply of human experiment, people that they could experiment on. And they've used electroshock, and all these methods were then basically taken across to America and to England and continued by scientists working with the CIA and MI5.
CIA and MI5. In the Nuremberg trials, when the Nazi leaders were on trial, is it Ewan Cameron?
Ewan Cameron.
Ewan Cameron.
Yes.
Tell us about him.
Well, Ewan Cameron was he was actually based in Canada for the majority of his time, and he was interested in a thing called deep-patterning and psychic driving. Essentially, he sat on the board for the tribunal for Nuremberg, prosecuting the German doctors, yes, for their human experimentation, whilst at the same time carrying out exactly the same experiments. What he essentially did was, as we know with Operation Paperclip, a lot of German scientists were moved back to America anyway. And their research was just carried on. And it was, it's highly hypocritical that Ewan Cameron was doing exactly the same things to patients, unknowing patients, members of the public, that he was prosecuting Nazis for.
So the CIA got some of their early techniques from the Nazis?
Oh, totally, absolutely. Most of it was based, they tended to, when it was started in 1953 under the technical service staff with Sidney Gottlieb, they tended to use more LSD at the beginning.
Right.
They found that LSD was a very, very sort of useful drug for this sort of thing.
Well, the Nazis didn't use LSD then?
Not as heavily as the CIA. They were more interested in certain other techniques. But, under Sidney Gottlieb, they were dosing up lots of people, notably Whitey Bulger, the mob boss. He was part of MK Ultra, and he complained about hallucinations, voices in his head, nightmares for years afterwards. And that he was personally dosed up by Sidney Gottlieb.
So what would be the CIA's ultimate reason for looking at LSD? Why does the CIA need mind control and LSD? What are they ultimately trying to achieve?
Well, officially when it was started, it was for things like double agents, truth serums, poisons, and things like that. But also you could use it for hypno-programming, like basically dropping a large amount of information into people's brains and using them as unwitting human computers, spies, essentially.
So they would then go out into society and say X, Y, and Z, so there would be disinformation agents, effectively.
Possibly, or they could just be used as spies. One of the notable hypnotists was George Estabrooks. Now, he was basically concerned with hypno-programming during World War II, and one of the things that he said was that basically he can hypnotise any person to do anything without their knowledge or consent. He can hypnotise people to commit treason against their country, completely breaking their moral code, and without their knowledge. And this was later sort of confirmed by another psychiatrist, J.G. Watkins, who actually did experiments with soldiers. What he would do was he would hypno-program a suggestion into their head, and they would attack superior officers in this particular experiment. In one case, an officer ended up getting stabbed. This is how absolutely total the control can be. And George Estabrooks would say that the key to this is to shatter a person's mind, to create multi-personality or dissociative identity through hypnotism. And he's said many times, this is not science fiction, he's done it. So, you know. I mean, Ewan Cameron himself was more interested in depatterning, which is essentially using electroshock drugs, drug-induced comas for 65 days at a time, LSD for 60 days at a time, and this would completely wipe the personality, allowing for new patterns to be psychically driven onto the person. And this would be done using embedded headphones and looped messages that you just cannot turn off.
And, I mean, we'll come on to it in a later section, possibly programming Manchurian candidates.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely possible, and several psychiatrists have spoken about this, that it is possible.
Okay, well, we're going to talk some more after the break. We're going to talk about the Tavistock Institute a bit more, which you touched on, and psychotronics, which involves microwaves, I believe.
Psychotronics is essentially electronic means of mind control, like exterior electronic means, and well, it could be brain implants, or it could be, you know, wave, ELF, subliminal messages.
So we've got psychotronics, which is electronics and microwaves, and that kind of, you've got drugs like LSD and probably a lot of other drugs as well, and then you've got hypnosis.
Yes.
Are there any other? I mean, obviously there's television and media, which is considered mind control, but are there any other techniques?
Well, I mean, I think it's just really about manufacturing consent, isn't it? It's not really about facts. It's more about public perception, and if you can make the public perceive something, that in itself is mind control.
Right. So you would call that a psyop?
I would.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Then. All right then, Neil. We're just going to go for a short break, so stay tuned.
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories. The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome back on board the Starship, and we're talking with Neil Saunders, who is a researcher of mind control. Now then, Neil, we mentioned the Tavistock Institute, which is a British institute which is responsible for a lot of mind control research, is that?
Yes, it would certainly appear so. Basically, Tavistock is a charitable organisation based in London, although a lot of the funding comes from places like the Rockefeller Foundation.
So when did that start then, Neil?
Well, this essentially started in 1921, so it predates MK Ultra, and it probably predates Korean and Chinese mind control techniques. In 1932, Kurt Lewin took over as directorship, and he was a German psychiatrist who was later taken back to America to start the OSS, which was the precursor for the CIA. So we can see that basically a lot of these organisations appear to be very, very interwoven.
And some people refer to the Tavistock Institute as a secret society.
Well, it's certainly got elements of secret societies in it. I mean, it refers to its psychologist as an invisible college, which basically harks back to sort of, you know, mystery religions and such like that. And also, its principal sort of raison d'etre is to reduce society back to a blank state. What it says is that by introducing terror on a widespread basis in society, it basically reverts to a tabula rasa, or a blank state where exterior control can be put onto the population. That, to me, sounds remarkably similar to order out of chaos, which you probably know is the Freemasonic.
So you see, would you describe the people who run the Tavistock Institute as like academic elites? Is that
no, absolutely.
And they thought that they should basically be controlling the plebs.
For the benefit of society.
Need to be, you know, dumbed down and made sure that they're basically controlled.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
so would you say that the Tavistock Institute had kind of a superiority, felt that they were superior to ordinary people?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is entirely what it's about. It's about training people in authority, training world leaders.
So they were involved in actually training up-and-coming leaders in psychological techniques
absolutely,
as well.
and applying psychological techniques to society. I mean, essentially, it is using fear to shock people into submission and desensitize them and destabilize them. I mean, Eric Trist, who was the chairman of the Tavistock Institute in 1963, described their work as creating social turbulence. Basically, he said that this will desensitize and destabilize the society. It will lower its ability to critically analyze, and it will mean that basically anybody or whoever should wish to could impose their worldview on the society. He said in 1963 that the world was already, he proudly stated that thanks to Tavistock, the world was already in a state of permanent social turbulence.
Right. And you contend that they deliberately keep it like that in order to best control the people. Is that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're fearful all the time, if you're on edge, you react. I mean, even from a psychological process, you get into that fight or flight sort of area, and so you don't have the chance to rationally go over things and critically analyse and deal with things. Basically, if you're terrified, you'll take any help and any advice that will be given. And, you know, the people that are often giving the advice are people in authority who possibly don't have your best interests at heart. And
we were discussing earlier the Cold War. You know, the communist threat, which went away in the early 90s, and now we've got the Arab threat.
Yeah, yeah.
And you think they're orchestrated purely for the same reason, to increase fear, so people are controlled? Or?
I think it's sort of broad stereotypes. You know, it's easily understandable enemies, people that basically anybody can say, yes, this is something that I can understand. I think that is very, very, very sort of important to them. You can't be questioning yourself. You've got to have yourself as the sort of defined norm, and anyone else defined as an other which can be looked upon with cynicism, essentially, you know, to be treated with suspicion.
All right, then, well, let's come on to psychotronics.
Okay.
Now, that's quite a long word. Can you explain what that means?
Well, psychotronics is essentially electronic means of hypnotising. You know, we've got George Esterbrook's using hypnotism, we've got Ewan Cameron using psychic driving, we've got people in Tavistock like William Sargent who are basically using exactly the same techniques as Ewan Cameron at the same time.
So you're saying using electronics?
But, well, these are sort of these are the previous methods.
Right.
Basically, in the 60s, the CIA seemed to move away from drugs into psychotronics, electronic means, and things like synthetic telepathy, you know, putting emotional states into people's heads, making people feel things, making people see and hear things that aren't there, using electronic means, using subaural devices, electromagnetic waves.
Right, so when you say using electronic devices, let's just drill down into that.
A physical device, like essentially like a ray gun or something like that one could shoot at somebody.
And that would be a microwave?
It could be a microwave, it could be ELF, it could be...
Extra low frequency radio waves?
Yeah, I mean...
So different types of electromagnetic waves, basically.
Yeah.
But what about implants?
Well, obviously implants are there as well. I mean, there's a broad range. You've got people like Michael Persinger and Igor Smirnov, and they are dealing with subliminal and subaural, sort of putting emotions into people's heads. If you see a puppy being kicked, say, like basically you're taking that stimuli and your brain will interpret that into electronic signals and you will feel emotion.
Yes.
And what they did essentially was bypass that visual stimuli.
Right.
They're making your brain respond to something, and then you get the physical emotive response. As far as implants go, the person who really was into implants was Jose Delgado. Now, a lot of people will have seen Jose Delgado and not realised it. It's the experiment where he had a bull in a bull ring, and by remote control means he stopped it charging at him mid-charge.
Right.
Jose Delgado basically felt that human free will was bad for democracy.
So you had an implant in the bull's head?
Yeah, these are called stymosevers, and basically what these do, they will go directly into the brain, and they can be controlled by remote, controlled by computer mechanisms.
And would that device be preventing the bull's muscles from working, or would it be inducing fear, or why would the bull stop in that case?
I have a quote here. Basically, Delgado stated, it's already possible to induce a large variety of responses from motor effects to emotional responses and intellectual manifestations by direct electrical stimulation. The individual is defenseless against direct manipulation of the brain because it is derived in his most intimate mechanisms of biological reactivity. Electrical stimulation of appropriate intensity always prevails over free will. For example, stimulation of the motor cortex will cause flexion of the hand that cannot voluntarily be avoided. Destruction of the frontal lobes produces changes in effectiveness which are beyond personal control.
Right.
I mean, he had some very strange ideas. He felt that perhaps organised slave societies were happier than normal, modern-day societies because they took away that agony of decision, which was good of him.
Really, yeah. It's amazing. I mean, but would you not need a whole load of implants if you wanted to create all of these different effects? I mean,
well,
you know what I mean?
Because there's different electrical signals. I suppose so, but I mean, I really wouldn't know. I mean, there's many people that have been found with these implants in them. I mean, Robert Naseland is one particular researcher. I believe he's in Switzerland or Sweden, I forget. But he's had it independently verified that he's got lots of foreign objects in his brain.
You would say they were put there by the CIA?
I think they were actually put there by his own country's secret police.
Now, what year are we talking about with this Bull experiment and the quote that you came out with there?
That was 1965. So obviously, the technology's gone on a little bit by there, but still, this is years ago, and this is what they're telling the public.
Yeah.
If you can just imagine what they're not telling the public, and they've got 50 years on us, it's incredible.
And so, okay. An electronic device inside your brain, that would be controlled remotely then?
Yes, remotely. But
I mean, was this guy, did he have wires attached?
No, not at all. This can be controlled through sort of electromagnetic waves.
Right.
Much in the same way I assume that satellite television can be picked up. It's a receiver and a transmitter, and
like your remote control for TV.
Yeah, exactly. And it can be affected like that.
Right.
But you may not even need that. I mean, Lieutenant Commander Thomas Norah was addressing a Navy psychological NATO conference on dimensions of stress and anxiety in Norway, and he accidentally let slip to the journalists there that basically the Navy had been involved in creating mind-controlled assassins using Ludovico technique, which is like in Clockwork Orange, where he's got his eyes held open, and he said it took about 4 to 6 weeks. They could completely change this person's character, make them a completely cold psychological killer, a robotic killer. When people suggested that perhaps he was speaking out of turn or wasn't really, it was confirmed by another psychiatrist called Dr. Erwin Sarensen, and he confirmed that basically the Navy had approached him and he'd carried out these experimentations many times.
So let's say that the person doesn't have an implant and they want to use psychotronics using microwave, and it's normally ELF, extra low frequency. Then how can those waves affect the brain's emotions or behaviour or what have you if it's just a radio wave effectively?
Well, I mean, if you think about the brain, it's essentially the human body is essentially electrons, electrical synapses going off and such like that. It's physiological responses that cause emotional responses. If we can get in the way of that and we can cause those electrical or synaptic responses to happen, we can create the same physiological responses in people.
Now, I mean, if you just consider the humans, we are, I heard Barry Trower saying this, who's an expert on microwave technology, and we're essentially water, or 75% water, and we know what a microwave oven does to a glass of water.
Yes.
So microwaves are, I think in a microwave oven you're talking about sort of 4 or 5 inches in terms of their wavelength.
Yeah.
And it's these wavelengths that affect the human body the most.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. And there's recorded instances of happening, and not just in the past. Like there's a researcher called Tim Reifer, and he strongly believes and shows incredible evidence that somebody, possibly MI5, possibly the police, is using electromagnetic waves and microwaves to disperse vagrants in Brighton. In Brighton, in February 2010, he recorded a mysterious white van, shooting waves of electromagnetism and microwave energy at people collecting in areas, making them ill, making them disperse, and often basically directed at people leaving the police station as well.
Now, have we not had that at Greenham Common?
Absolutely, we had it at Greenham Common. And again, it's not officially admitted to, but basically they had a system of security in there that it was electromagnetic wave patterns and such like that. People were becoming ill at the same time. People were having circulatory problems.
Might that not be an audio type of weapon?
Absolutely, it could well be. But,
Well, you would say that they've got microwave crowd dispersal type technology?
Yes, because basically a lot of the people were coming up with symptoms that were completely... In medical books, if you looked at radiation poisoning, this is what people were getting. They were getting bleeding out of their eyes, they were getting headaches. A lot of people later developed cancers and sadly died.
Yes, because, I mean, this is, I believe, one of the side effects of microwaves, that it can cause cancer.
Well, it's known that it can, because in 1953, the Russians were bombarding the US embassy in Moscow with microwave energy. The American government actually knew about this, but they didn't let the employees know about this. And I believe it was Ambassador Stossel developed lymphoma, bleeding eyes, and eventually died. Now, what happened was, rather than sort of stop this, the Americans used it to conduct their own experiments, see what would happen to people, and then they continued this experimentation back in America under Dr. Ross Addy, for one.
And there's a possible incident in one of the Iraq wars.
Yes. This has been talked about in a number of areas. Essentially, it's been questioned, why did all these heavily sort of fortified and dug-in Iraqi Republican Guard all en masse surrender? What happened, according to the theory, is that a helicopter went over transmitting suboral or ELF or microwave, nobody quite knows, subliminal messages, and this caused the en masse dissolution of forces. They surrendered, and they were very happy about it. If you look at, there are some footage of them basically running towards their captors as if, you know, they're parents. You know, they really sort of go for it.
Now, it's incredible how that can be used, and I don't think it's from what I've read, it's down to the intensity necessarily of the beam. You know, it can be done with quite a weak beam. It's the actual possible frequency or the resonance or what have you. Do you have any information on that?
Well, I wouldn't like to say. Do you know? I mean, there's different methods. And
you see, you quoted ELF, extra low frequency radio waves, and microwaves. They're completely different in different areas of the spectrum. Right. Microwaves are much faster frequency than an ELF wave. So they affect the brain slightly differently, but they both affect the brain. Is that what you...
Well, under MK Ultra, there was at least 149 separate projects, okay, and they range from truth serums to various different types of mind control, including one called perfect concussion, which basically is a ray that can wipe somebody's mind at a distance of hundreds of meters. Right. So there are numerous ways, essentially, and, you know, they've spent thousands and thousands of pounds researching it.
So how could people protect themselves if they're being mind controlled remotely from someone in the next building, let's say?
Well, Jim Keith, who's an excellent researcher, sadly now dead, he claimed that the Tenderloin area of San Francisco was under constant either ELF or microwave bombardment, and when it was, and when the intensity peaked, the amount of fights and rapes and violent crimes would suddenly rocket up by 5%, which is noticeable enough to carry out experiments, but not noticeable enough for people to say, hey, what's going on? Now, he found that he managed to stop this buzzing by wrapping his head in tinfoil, which I assume is where we get the tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy nut idea.
Yeah. I think I have heard Barry Trower again, he's an ex-British intelligence officer, and he researched microwaves. That was his job. And he said that you erect like in aluminium, it's aluminium as you say.
Like a Faraday cage almost,
yeah, but he claimed that it needed to be thicker than a piece of foil. It would need to be a few mil thick. You put that against your bedroom window when you go to bed at night to stop yourself being mind controlled.
Yeah, well, you know, it's possible, but who knows what techniques they've got anyway. So
all right then, Neil, well, we're going to talk some more after this short break, so don't go away.
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories. The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
It's the 4th of March and we've come along to Hexham livestock market where they sell cows and sheep and that kind of thing. I thought there were going to be things like that. We're at a once-a-year event here where young farmers are, I think they're given grants to purchase a calf sort of 6 months ago, last year, and what they have to do is suckle the calf through the winter and grow it as much as they can, and then they then sell the calves, and the young farmer that actually makes the most money on the calf wins the competition. So we should have, and I think there are over 60 calves that have been purchased and are entering this competition. They're not being sold today, I think they're going to be sold tomorrow. We've brought along 50 copies of Silent Killers to hand out with a message which reads, have you seen any unexplained animal deaths or injuries? Watch this shocking documentary for full information. And it's got my telephone number on here, so we're going to hand these 50 DVDs out to anyone who keeps large amounts of cattle or sheep. These strange injuries. My telephone number's on. I had some good news today because my Member of Parliament Dave Anderson has actually submitted a parliamentary question to the Secretary of State Jim Fitzpatrick, asking him when he's going to reply to Richard D. Hall's correspondence about animal mutilation. My telephone number's on. Okay, right, I've handed out all 50 DVDs of Silent Killers, and it was okay until about the last 5 where I tried to give a copy to the secretary, but I didn't know it was the secretary, and he was asking all these questions, who was backing me, etc, 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 and I should have asked his permission to give people DVDs. So anyway, he let me hand out the remaining ones that I had, so we're going to go to the pub because I'm bloody freezing. We're talking with Neil Saunders, who is a researcher of mind control. Now then, Neil, we were talking about the use of electronic equipment
Yes.
in mind control, and there's a guy called Michael Persinger,
Yes.
who in the 60s worked on the MK Ultra projects,
Yes.
and you know, a lot of people might not believe this, but he developed a God helmet.
Yes, well, basically, I mean, this has been independently verified by a lot of, curious, sceptical scientists, and what he was able to do was make a physical helmet that basically made people feel as though they were talking to God. It was a simulation of a religious experience, and it's never really been explained in sort of mainstream media why he was doing this. Obviously, the applications through mind control are quite strong. If you've got God telling you what to do, it's fairly difficult to disagree with him.
So yeah, you can understand why they might want that equipment. If they were going to try and get someone to believe that they're getting a message from a higher power, then that's a way of controlling someone, I suppose.
It's very, very persuasive, I would have thought. Yeah, I mean, Persinger was also involved in directly putting emotional states into people's heads. Like we discussed earlier, making people feel white-hot rage, making people feel completely disconsolate and just breaking down. And you know, he could do this. The God helmet was actually physically put on somebody. These other techniques could be used at distance.
At distance?
Yeah, and I believe they used electronic or microwave type energies.
And so, are there any people who've actually reported being experimented on with this God helmet? I mean, what do they say? Do they feel anything? Do they actually...
Yeah, as far as I know, the God helmet is. I mean, the God helmet's not really sort of not talked about. That's something that he's sort of quite happy to show to sort of, you know, people in New Scientist magazine, this sort of thing. And people have been there and said, yeah, no, it is strange. It feels like, you know, I feel separated, I feel dissociated, I feel like I'm floating, and I feel like I can hear a voice and such like that. But yeah, lots of, you know.
But you would say that other than the God helmet, they've got technology which is way in advance of that, and far more sophisticated, perhaps.
Yeah, I think the God helmet really is more of a sideshow. You know, it's just a way of saying, look, this is what we've actually been doing all this time. We're trying to prove that religious experiences are psychological processes or something like that, and it's not really, is it? It's used for sort of exploiting these religious experiences. You know, there's many other people that were involved in that. You may have seen the film The Men Who Stare at Goats.
Right.
Oliver Lowry was the psychiatrist involved in that, and again, he was basically talking about. He's not mentioned in the film; he's mentioned in the book, but he's talking about again transferring emotional states, making people do things that you know they wouldn't normally do.
So was that film basically discrediting people who say that mind control is what they were up to then, or
yeah?
I mean, what do you think the overall purpose of that film was?
I think it's there to yeah, it's a disinfo.
Disinformation.
Yeah, I think disinfo, and it's just sort of, you know, smooth it off and make it's just silly, crazy, wacky old experiments by whacked out hippie soldiers and stuff like that. Not really to be taken seriously, not really to be worried about or anything like that. It's just you know, something that we tried in our crazy heyday or whatever.
But you would contend that it's still being mind control and possibly remote viewing is practiced today in all seriousness by the CIA and others.
Definitely, definitely. I mean,
and that film would be just to sort of
yeah,
dispel people's interest in it. Perhaps.
We're not interested in that. This is just silly. This was a silly aside that we were using, and it's not the case. I mean, Igor Smirnov, who's often called the father of psychotronics, basically his Smirnov patent was bought by SciTech, and SciTech is a remote viewing organisation run by Ingo Swann, Ed Dames, and Colonel B. Alexander.
Just for those who don't know what remote viewing is, Neil, I'll try and describe it briefly. It's the ability to come out of your body to somewhere else and gain information of another part of the world or what have you. Some people say that it's the same as an out-of-body experience.
Yeah, like transcendental meditation.
Right.
That sort of thing.
And are you convinced that that works?
I'm convinced that it has worked in the past, and I'm convinced that basically the American government has put millions of dollars into researching it, and you don't put millions of dollars into researching something unless you expect to get some results. I mean, it's actually discussed in the very good book Psy-Spies by Jim Mars. He documents a lot of the documented experiments that they carried out. Basically, they got into a psychic war with Russians. The Russians were doing exactly the same sorts of experiments, and often you would get two psychic spies wandering around in the psychic plane, able to see each other and stuff like that, completely, you know, dissociated from their body.
It's quite hard to believe. I mean, I'm not. You see, remote viewing. I don't. I'm open-minded, as you have to be. But I'm not convinced by remote viewing. But perhaps I haven't read, you know, the books that you've got on display here. Maybe I need to. I mean, but you seem convinced that remote viewing works. Then.
Well, it doesn't seem that dissimilar to me from, as I say, transcendental meditation, which, you know, can be practiced, and also things like near-death experiences, and like you were saying, out-of-body experiences. I know people that have had out-of-body experiences, and you know, these can be made to happen. So, you know, there's definitely something into it. Otherwise, they wouldn't continue. The organisation SciTech wouldn't exist anymore, and it does.
Yes, and Colonel John Alexander, who was involved, I believe I heard him on a radio station say that he thought Men Who Stare at Goats was 95% hokum.
Well, it probably is, but that 5% is the bit that you've got to look at.
It's the 5%, which is there's truth in that.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing about John B. Alexander is that it shows that these aren't just scientific experimentations. They have got military applications. The military are very, very interested in these things, and they continue to fund them and they continue to research them. And you've got to question, why would they be doing this unless there was some sort of tangible result?
And more recently, the chap called Michael Aquino, tell us about him, because he's heavily involved in the NSA, the National Security Agency.
Well, Michael Aquino, a lot of people may know him as the leader of the Temple of Set, which was, a satanic offset.
SET.
SET, Set, the Egyptian god of the dead. Basically, it's an offshoot from the Church of Satan, started in San Francisco by Xander LaVey. It is a satanic cult. It is, he is the leader of it. He's also a military general. He's the highest ranked military officer in the NSA.
And he's still serving now?
Oh, yeah.
Right, yeah. And he's also the head of the Church of...
The Temple of Set.
The Temple of Set, okay.
Yes, well, he wrote a paper called From Psyop to Mind War, which basically talks about using psychological operations as a means of mass mind control, which is basically, coercing the populace through fear and things like that. And also killing people with ionizing radiation, using death rays and things like that that could be used at a distance to kill people.
Now, I've heard rumours that quite often children are involved in this research.
Yeah, well, I mean, even within the MK-Ultra mind control papers, it basically suggests that if you want to do the dissociative identity or the, the smashing of creating alters within a person, and this could be used for assassination purposes, it could be used for sort of sex slave purposes, it could be used for spies, using using people as sort of computers and such like that. According to the MK-Ultra, it's better to do it to a child under the age of 3. And I assume this is because basically their mind is not well formed enough and it is sort of more malleable and can be easily shattered.
Right, but once you've done that to the child, was then the ultimate purpose of that? Just research, then, or would the child then be used for something?
It really depends on who you believe. I mean, if you believe people like Cathy O'Brien, for example, basically she would say that these people are then used for. I mean, the children themselves are used in child prostitution rings, and to make money and to transport drugs. Also, basically to use for blackmail against politicians, senators, people like that. We've got you involved in our little thing, but we've filmed you now, so there's nothing you can do about it.
Yes.
And basically used throughout their lives. I think that the point of making an alter out of a child is that you've got literally a blank state that you can then continually abuse, traumatise.
And I mean, I've reported on the Holly Gregg case, where she's been abused by people from the, in the elite or the establishment, as you would call it.
Yes. And
possibly there's paedophilia going on in some of these groups. But we're not here to talk about that today. But I mean, the Cathy O'Brien that you mentioned, I mean, her story is just phenomenal if you believe everything that she says. That she was a White House sex slave, and she's had sex with all of these top people that we all see on TV, and she seems very plausible to me.
Yeah, she certainly believes it. I mean, but the thing, that's not that much of an isolated case. The CIA have been instrumental in creating cults, basically for that very purpose. I mean, even Michael Aquino was caught up in it. Essentially, the Temple of Set collected at the Presidio in America, the army, the military base, and there was a daycare centre there. Now, many of the children, I believe it's 65, I could be wrong about that, 65 of the children claimed that they were being used in satanic rituals and being made to perform sex acts on people, including Michael Aquino. He was actually acquitted of this, so, for legal purposes, nothing happened to him. However, a lot of these children ended up with, similar to Holly Gregg, with venereal diseases, gonorrhea, things like this, which is not really expected of toddlers. But it's interesting to note that this man, he's involved with the Temple of Set, which is, a high satanic, occultic organisation. It's got connections to the Church of Satan, and then obviously through that you could suggest that he's got connections to the process, Scientology, etc., etc., etc. He's also involved with military applications of mind control software and technology, mind controlling individual subjects, and mass mind control of populace. It all seems to tie together.
I mean, there are other projects for which there is probably less evidence, and some of the claims are a bit more far out,
Yeah.
such as the Montauk project.
Yes.
Where, in the claims in that project are phenomenal. And I know that you don't want to go into things that there's no hard evidence of, but the Montauk project, just briefly, was using young people,
Yeah.
predominantly blue-eyed, blonde-haired,
Yes.
because they have some sort of particular genetic psychic ability.
Possibly a connection to sort of ancient Atlanteans, if you believe sort of Zechariah Sitchin and alien seeding of the population and stuff like that. Then these would be the original genetic blueprint, and because of that, they have that alien responsiveness.
Allegedly in the Montauk project, they were trying to basically record emotions psychologically on computers and then transmit them via that big transmitter to create fear in an enemy, or, as we discussed earlier, make an enemy surrender.
Yes.
And the interfacing technology that read the minds of whoever they were experimenting with possibly came from alien technology.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the rumour.
Well, I mean, the thing about the Montauk thing is that there's established things that did actually happen there in the Montauk town and stuff like that. Animals going crazy, running into certain directions, all of them en masse and stuff like that. I would, very much believe that perhaps back-engineered alien technology is used. I mean, if we look at it's all Nazi, isn't it? A lot of it's Nazi, and if we look at the sort of claims about Nazi involvement was with aliens, the Hannibal, flying saucers, the Foo Fighters, the possible connection to the Greys, the bases in Antarctica. If that has any credence at all, then it's not a massive stretch to connect back-engineered alien technologies to mind control.
Okay then, Neil. Well, that's all we've got time for this programme, but we are going to have you back on the Starship soon for another programme where we're going to discuss the media's involvement in mind control.
Yes.
Which is very extensive.
Yes.
But thank you very much indeed for coming on board, Neil. It's fascinating talking to you, and
thank you very much.
I'm really looking forward to the next discussion that we're going to have.
Me too.
Okay.
Sounds great.
Well, thank you. And it just remains for me to say, keep your eyes on the skies and your feet on the ground, and tell all your friends about this show.
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories. The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and we're going to start things off with the interesting person of the week, who is Sam Wright, and he's going to talk here about something which happened in Vietnam. Now, this is very relevant for what we're going to be discussing in the last section of this show.
A chap named Al Fassbender, who was a captain in Vietnam, and he tells the story of the last days of the war when a general came in and he said, right, we've got to go behind the lines to pick 5 soldiers up. And he had 2 heavily armed guards with him. And he thought, this is a bit queer, a general going behind the lines just to pick 5 soldiers up. Anyway, he didn't argue with them, and they went behind the lines. They landed at this place about 200 yards from the actual jungle itself, and they seen these soldiers. They were in disguise sort of thing, they're all black, and he called them over, you know, and they came walking towards him. They got within about 10 yards, and he said to these 2 guards, fire, and they shot them dead. He said, I went berserk, why did you shoot these soldiers dead? He said, there's a reason. So he said to the guards, turn them on the back and wash the faces. So he turned them on the back and washed the faces, and he called him over. He said, look, they were clones. He said they had 20 clones in Vietnam in the last few weeks of the war, and they went in groups of 5, and the first 15 had been killed within a few days, and these 5 were the only survivors. And he said he couldn't take them back because they have implants in the head, and all they taught is to kill. They killed men, women and children, animals. That's all they did. So they actually killed them there and buried them.
Fascinating account there from Sam Wright. This week's guest joins me for a second time on board the Starship. He has spent the last 10 years researching a much unpublicised subject which affects everyone's lives in a way that most people are not aware of, that of mind control. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. It's Neil Saunders.
Hello.
Welcome back, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Now, the last time we spoke about mind control, it was predominantly sort of government, CIA mind control programs,
Yes.
but a lot of people don't realise that they are being mind controlled by the media. And I think you would contend that every person is a victim of mind control.
I think to a degree, absolutely, everybody is, yes.
Right.
I mean, very basic things like if we think about brand identity of products, every time you buy a product, you buy a branded product, it's because there is a sort of constructed ideology and an image around that product, and basically you feel that that represents you. You feel that if you buy these products, you know, they are sort of a part of your personality. They represent what you do, and you know, everybody's guilty of this. I like everybody else have constructed an image, you know. But this is the thing, it is.
My brand would be all of the charity shops and concerts.
Well, there you go. But you know, again, well, even with that, you know,
Yeah.
you're the person that rejects brand identity. So therefore, you're defining oneself by
the fact that I'm rejecting it.
yeah, exactly.
So I am mind controlled.
Sadly. So, but, you know, I mean, this is the thing, and it's nobody's fault, because basically this, thousands and thousands and millions of pounds have gone into doing this. Adverts attack people at a subliminal level. You know, they play on people's herd instincts. When you buy into a brand identity like iPhone, say, for example, look at the recent cult of iPhone. You're buying into a larger concept, you're buying into the ideology, and you're basically buying a piece of that dream. I think it becomes dangerous when basically people start to associate this far too much with themselves, and you get shells of people covered in talismans, essentially. And which, again,
Talismans?
Well, talismans that representational symbols of who they are. You know, I'm this because I wear these trainers, I wear this watch, I wear this, I have this hairstyle. It defines you, and that, again, that's perfectly fine, as long as you realise that these aren't the authentic you. These are merely stickers, essentially. You know, these are things that are put there to garnish you, and again, it can be perfectly healthy, but unfortunately, a lot of the time people they try and fill the hole in their psyche with products. They feel that basically if I buy this product I will feel happy. If I move to this, if I keep it with the Joneses and live the dream, then essentially I will be a happier person for it. And the problem is that that's not always the case. I mean, the key to sales is to convince somebody that you're doing them a favour. Okay, these companies, they might have a brand identity, but they're ultimately multinational companies in the business of making money.
Right, so adverts are about creating a need in someone that perhaps wasn't there previously.
Oh, well, that's exactly what they're there to do. You know, on a very basic level, if you required that product, you wouldn't need me to sell it to you, would you? You know, you've got to be convinced of it. But, you know, people don't realise that the adverts, they hit you at a subconscious level. They're specifically designed to hit you. You know, jingles will stay in your head, phrases will stay in your head, and you will use these over and over again because they are hitting you at a subconscious level. They use things like bright, vibrant colours in fast food restaurants because it excites you and it makes you want to get in there and get out. And in sort of posh restaurants, you'll have sort of earthier pastel colours and something to calm you down and keep you there for a long time spending money.
Okay, so, I mean, I thought it was very clever of the marketers to, you know, we used to have shampoo, and then somebody invented this stuff called conditioner, right? And so they could sell people 2 bottles of shampoo instead of just one.
Well, it's vital. I mean, if it wasn't, why would they be selling to us?
I use a bar
What would they
soap.
have to gain?
Yeah, and so, okay, so they're creating these needs, but you would contend that some of these messages are completely subliminal?
Absolutely.
We're totally unaware of them?
Well, the thing about television, for example, is that when you watch television, you relax and you go into what's called an alpha state brainwave. Now, this is exactly what you do when you're inducting someone into hypnosis. You slow down their brainwaves and you talk directly to the subconscious. And this is like, for example, if you're driving along in a car and all of a sudden you realise, oh, where am I? I've reached my destination.
Yeah.
It's because you've gone into your learned subconscious mode and you're just going on autopilot.
Kind of a bit of a daydream sort of
Exactly
state.
like a daydream. That's exactly the same thing. It's basically a slowing of brain waves to a point where you become inducted. And this happens when you're watching television. You're at an alpha state, which means that basically when you're watching television, it's like a one-way conversation, and your subconscious, which is constantly learning, taking in, and doesn't criticize in any way, is just being impacted by all of these things.
Right.
And there's no way to escape it.
Right. So how are they affecting your brain if you have no conscious memory of it then?
Well, this is exactly how you would implant hypnotic suggestion in hypnosis. You get somebody to the state where their brain is receptive, a trance state, and then you can talk directly to the subconscious, and any of these suggestions become learned behavior.
Right. Right. And, you know, obviously sex is used a lot in advertisements, isn't it?
I mean, they tend to tap into things of Jungian archetypes, and Carl Jung, obviously a famous psychologist, felt that we have a shared collective unconscious, and that certain symbols, are taken in and decoded automatically by people, and because of that, they will use that, and often in ways that we don't understand. Sex is obviously used because it implies that, you know, this product will make me sexually attracted to people, or this product might make me, I'm driving this car, I might get the girl that's on the bonnet, you know, that sort of thing. But also they'll show things like babies to appeal to a maternal instinct. And I don't know whether you've ever noticed any sort of hand cream, face cream, beauty products.
Right.
The adverts will have the woman holding the pot like this, usually headless, holding the pot like this.
Yes.
And this is basically to represent the uterine shape and to appeal at a subconscious Jungian level. It implies that if you buy this product, you'll be fertile, you'll be the sort of person that can reproduce, and, you know, again, that's basically hitting primordial instincts, so that, you know, we wish to be that person.
And what about sort of television programs themselves, rather than just the commercials then? I mean, are they programming us?
I think to an extent, certainly. I think what happens, I wouldn't go so far as to say, a lot of people would say, like, if you watch a violent film, you'll go out and act it out like a sort of child's play sort of scenario. I wouldn't buy that for a second. I don't think it's as simple as monkey see, monkey do. What I do feel is that basically films and television, they tend to manufacture a consent. They tell you what is right, what is wrong, what is the expected response to things, how to deal with things. And a couple of examples of that is, if you think about, talk to any teenager and ask them to describe someone being shot, and what they would do, they would describe the movie representation of, you know, slow motion action shot, you know, all this, and that's not a real representation. So what we're seeing is a codified representation of reality that we know how to decode, and is presented to us as reality. And another example of that is the sound that frogs make. If you ask anybody all over the world what sound do frogs make, they'll say ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. And they don't. There's innumerable different types. Basically, that comes from the fact that Hollywood had one type of frog sample, which was taken from the California frog, and then it was then used over and over again in different things. So basically, it becomes absorbed into the cultural lexicon that this is a fact, this is real, and this is the way that it works.
Well, right, if we come on to films then, Neil. Obviously, films were used during the wars with propaganda to get people, you know, to be more motivated, etc. But are people using films now to change public perception? Would you say?
Yeah, I definitely would say so. I mean, we can look at films like we were talking about earlier, The Men Who Stare at Goats and things like that. These are pure disinformation films.
So why would The Men Who Stare at Goats be, you would say it was disinformation? Well,
I mean, you can use it. Films provide a sort of cultural reference for either preparedness or for, you know, dismissing. If, for example, if I was to say, oh, I was out the other day and I saw this brown alien running through the woods, this boy captured it, helped it, took it back to his house, and 3 days later the government turned up, you'd say, Neil, you're thinking of that film E.T., this isn't real, this is a film. And it's similar to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. If you start talking about mind control, people will start talking about, oh, that's that film, The Manchurian Candidate, or that's that film, Conspiracy Theory. And it allows for an easy forum for dismissal.
What do you call it? Plausible denial?
Well, plausible deniability, I suppose, is
I
the
mean,
thing.
I noticed, I started writing a blog for the Sci-Fi website, you know, the Sci-Fi channel.
Yeah.
And I found that I would write about various extraterrestrial stories. I wrote an article about the Lloyd Pye skull, you know, the Star Child skull.
Yeah.
And honestly, the worst sort of offensive attack I've ever had on any forum was from the the people who watch sci-fi, because they were just, well, you've watched this film, you've watched that film, it can't possibly be true. And I find that people who follow science fiction are the biggest skeptics of everything, because they think you've borrowed it from a film.
Well, this is it, isn't it?
Yeah, so films, Neil, I mean, a lot of them seem to have rewritten history.
Well, yeah, I mean, this is another thing. I mean, obviously, not everybody takes films seriously, but there's numerous examples of where films have just completely rewritten history. I mean, there's things like the American films, like, you know, Saving Private Ryan, Pearl Harbor, things like that. But there's also things that have been absorbed into sort of historical fact, like the storming of the Winter Palace during the Bolshevik Revolution, 1918. You talk to anybody, even people interested in communism and Trotskyism, and they'll say, oh yes, no, this was a very important thing. It never happened. It was mocked up for an Eisenstein film, and it was used as state propaganda to basically show we are powerful against the Tsar or whatever. You know, this is garbage. It never happened.
You were telling me earlier that if any film portrays military hardware, it has to get permission, is that?
Well, if you want to use military equipment, if you want to use an American aircraft carrier, tank, whatever, the people who provide that, the American military, they will get a final rewrite of the script. So they're basically not going to allow you to do anything that that portrays them in a negative light. And this is all documented in a book called Operation Hollywood.
Right.
You know, many films have basically had the scripts, characters, plots completely rewritten to sort of, you know, formulate to the military propaganda, which makes you think how much of a say did they get about it, and especially when you're thinking about sort of war films, films like Executive Decision and True Lies and things like that. In the 90s, we saw a distinct shift from Russians as enemies to fundamentalist Arabs as enemies, and one could argue that basically this is just talking about the wider concerns of the world, but I'd say that this is basically reinforcing stereotypes. This is, you know, preparing people and saying, look, this is a bad guy, we can tell. For a short period, the bad guy was always a European or an English guy with an accent who's an intellectual, and you'd have to question things like, why would an American audience want to consider intellectual Europeans as an enemy?
But it was like what you said earlier about fear, about creating fear.
Absolutely.
And that in order to control a society, you know, there has to be an enemy image.
Yes.
And now it's the Islamic terrorist.
Yeah, I mean,
and, you know, as we've seen, well, presented on this show, that we believe that a lot of these alleged terrorist attacks are in fact false flag events. And, you know, because they're trying to create an enemy image.
You could even go so far as to say that people understood and could decode 9/11, because if 9/11 was a film, right, the narrative doesn't make sense, the plot is rubbish, there's holes all over the place, it doesn't make sense. It's basic, but for a sort of person sat there who's not going to critically analyse it, it's fine. We've got a start, we've got a stop, we've got a reason, we've got evidence, we've got a neat conclusion, and that's fine. I can then package that psychologically away and go, fine, that's it. This is why it happened. This is what's going to happen because of it. And, you know, it played out like a film.
All right then, Neil. Well, we're going to go for a short break, and in the second and third parts, we will talk about LSD. Don't go away.
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories. The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome back on board the Starship, and we're talking with Neil Saunders, who's a researcher of mind control. Now, we've been talking about the media and specifically how TV, film, adverts, etc. control people's minds and make them feel, you know, that they belong to a particular, you know, culture or what have you. So, you know, what would you say about, I mean, has it always been like this throughout history, or, you know, I mean, when has this started?
Well, I think people plan it. You know, if you look at Edward Bernays, he's basically the father of public relations. He was the nephew of Freud, and if you want to get interested in marketing, advertising, public relations, you need to read Propaganda, which is by him. It's literally the Bible for public relations. And I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially he said that none of your thoughts are your own. Your minds are moulded and your tastes are suggested. All your ideas are formed by people that you've never met, that have agendas that you've got no idea about. Him and intellectuals like Walter Lippmann basically felt that, you know, for the sake of this progressive democracy, people are irrational and stupid, and they need to be contained using fear so that basically the society can continue.
It's rather patronising, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that people in these positions think that they have to control. I mean, you know, how would society be different if these psychological controls were not making people all, you know, go to McDonald's or buy this brand or identify with that football team, or, you know, would the masses run amok and then cause a revolution? Or
probably not, but it's much easier to control people. If you think of behavioural sciences, if you've got a stimuli and a response, we can tell that basically, you know, how people are going to do, and it's just much easier to control people. And I think to an extent, you get that people are being pigeonholed. Even alternative cultures are being marketed. I mean, you know, if you're a skateboarder or you're a punk or you're an emo or a goth, you know, because you've been out and bought these mass-produced products. Yeah. You basically have a sort of collective individualism. And the problem is that when you put yourself to an ideology like that, it's very difficult to get out of it. Aside from the fact that you're basically in a herd, and it's very difficult to stand up against the herd, it's difficult to criticise something that you love. If, for example, during the World Cup, it's difficult for some people to basically stand up and say, we're not very good, because we're in that mindset of this is our team, this is who we are loyal to, and this is basically what we would do. And the problem is that basically we've got a continuing reinforcement from the media, from all outlets of the media, that now, the time that we're living in now, is the best time ever. This is the zenith, this is the peak of civilization, and this is reinforced constantly through shows like, remember the 90s, and The Shameful Secrets of the 80s was another one. And basically what they're doing very subtly is they're saying, remember how naive we used to be, remember how easily fooled we used to be before now, because now we're the most media savvy that we can ever be. You've got your fingertips on all these little information nodes, and there's no way that you, an informed reader, could ever be fooled, because it wouldn't happen. You get the incidents where people basically say, I'm completely informed. I read the Sun, the Daily Mail, and the Mirror.
Yeah, they try to big up people and make them think that they can see through everything, and that's one way of actually making sure that they don't see through everything.
It makes people feel secure, basically. You know, and that's a criticism that's levelled against conspiracy theorists all the time. Oh no, you're just setting yourself up so that you're superior to people. You know what is up, what is down, what is left, what is right, and you're other from everybody else. That criticism uses exactly the same psychological process by criticising and saying there's no way that that could be real, because I know that this is up, this is down, this is left, this is right, and I'm far too informed to be tricked. In actual fact, if you look at the media outlets, there's probably about 4 or 5 different corporations that own the majority of 95% of the media, and they've got an agenda. They've got an agenda, and they've got people working for them that want to keep people occupied. We go back to Tavistock. Zbigniew Brzezinski, in his book The Technotronic Era, which basically came out from a 1968 Tavistock function, said that we need to control people by using mass sports events, mass visual events, you know, huge concerts, almost like sort of Roman Colosseums, you know, get the masses interested in this so that they don't start to critically analyse things, so that their character is lowered, so that, you know, everything that basically
get them watching Pop Idol and dancing on shite. Absolutely.
I mean, that's a thing called the culture industry, which I really sort of feel is absolutely right. I mean, it came out of the Frankfurt School, which is Wilhelm Reich, and Adorno and Horkheimer. Basically, they wrote the culture industry, or enlightenment, as mass deception. And if I could just quote, they said, popular culture is akin to a factory producing standardized cultural goods through film, radio and magazines to manipulate the masses into passivity. The easy pleasures available through consumption of popular culture make people docile and content, no matter how difficult their economic circumstances. And you see this with shows like you've mentioned, like the X Factor and stuff like that. We have a narrowing of cultural output. We have similar formats, the same people, the same type of artists performing the same covers of the same songs, and essentially what we're getting is we're getting mediocrity peddled out as if it's something special. Peddled out as if it's something special. And, you know, that's not great. It's basically just lowering the expectations.
Right, so, I mean, if we just consider that, if we consider television and its in popular culture, so would you say then that there is some kind of guiding influence above it who's allowing certain programs to be commissioned in a certain way in order to dumb people down?
I think
that they don't think for themselves.
I think so. I'm
so who would you say is doing that then? You know, I mean, it's obviously, it's not our government MPs or anything like that. Is it,
I'd look
you know, the New World Order, or who's controlling? I mean, you know, a lot of people believe that the BBC is controlled by MI5. I mean,
I've heard that basically you've got to run stories past the Department of Defence. Like, I mean, that's not even as sort of conspiratorial as it might sound. If I was to come across a new weapon and go, wow, this is amazing, I want to put this out, it would, you know, be a national security issue. If I'm telling state secrets, so yeah, fine, we can see a reason for this, but if that safeguard is in place, what's to stop them doing
abusing
that?
it?
Yeah. I mean, look at David Shayler's book, Spies, Lies and Whistleblowers. He basically proved that I think it was The Guardian that he specifically looked at. They employ MI5 and soft journalists that will basically you know, highlight the things that they want to be highlighted and not talk about the things they don't.
I believe Jon Snow, he was asked to become an MI5 agent, and I believe he refused, which is why the information got out to try to recruit, you know, Jon Snow, one of the, you know, the top news broadcaster.
Yeah.
It then makes me think, well, how many other, because if they were going to say indoctrinate Jon Snow in MI5 to manipulate the news and perhaps feed things back, it would be no use just recruiting Jon Snow.
No.
They would surely they would ask Jeremy Paxman, David Dimbleby, all these kind of people. And I often wonder about, you know, the people who are the sort of, you know, the figureheads of the news.
Yeah.
How many of them, you know, are being manipulated?
Well, if you were to believe that there was a conspiracy, you can't believe that they would let people who were dangerous to this conspiracy on the television. Of course they wouldn't. You know, I mean, this is a whole other thing. Is another aspect of mind control is that people live vicariously through celebrities, through people that they see on the television, and often the representation is not real. You know, it's either a complete manufacture or it's marketed well. You can even look at sort of, you know, very famous heterosexual icons like Rock Hudson, Cary Grant and such like that, you know, and in the private life they were privately homosexual. So their perceived image is completely different to their actual image. But it's that perceived image that people latch onto. For example, if you were to get people like Angelina Jolie throwing the weight behind charities like, and even charities that have got connections to, you know, the CFR, Trilateral Commission and stuff like that, we're more inclined to believe them because we associate the image of the celebrity, and for whatever reason we feel, oh, that's someone we can trust, that's someone nice, I know about them. We don't know about them. It is a marketing campaign.
And we were talking about BP earlier on and the Gulf of Mexico.
Yes.
Does you believe there's some manipulation going on there?
Oh, there's definitely manipulation. I mean, even aside from the fact that they're basically stopping people from going and viewing it and such like that, recently, in the past couple of days, they've been caught photoshopping images of the cleanup to make it look like they've got this huge, important command centre, and you know, they're flying over it, and it's very, very obviously photoshopped. The thing is that nobody's looking at that. That's not being discussed in the news. What is being discussed in the news is that Lindsay Lohan's gone to prison, which is obviously far, far more important. And if you're not interested in Lindsay Lohan, Mel Gibson's being a racist. And, you know, the same thing happens again and again and again. like there was certain inquiries that were going off, just so happened to be going off into the legality of the Iraq conflict, about the time that Tiger Woods got into his big palaver, and then all of a sudden we're interested in all these people. And that makes me very suspicious, because are you really telling me that nobody knew about all these people right up until that very second that it happened? You know, these things are kept on a back burner and released for entertainment, basically.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a government minister who was sacked because they sent an email where they said, oh, this is a good chance to get this bad news out, when a particular story occurred.
Well, I think that happened as well on 9/11. I believe that certain American politicians were saying that this is an excellent time to bury news.
Yeah.
But even the news, you know, can you really trust the news? Look at the 7/7 incident, okay? Not only have you got, within the incident, you've got massive lies. Again, the narrative doesn't work. The images are very obviously photoshopped. The guy's got the rail going through his arm. It's ridiculous. That train that they were supposed to be on never happened. So that's one element of mind control and, you know, public perception. The other is that basically we've now got these programs, these impartial BBC programs that are basically you know, going through the conspiracy. I've never seen an impartial BBC program.
Yeah, the BBC
Discovery
Conspiracy
Channel.
Files.
Mysteriously, they take an hour to discover that, well, the official story was absolutely right.
Yes, of course they do. And they're basically hit pieces.
Yes,
these
exactly. That's
Conspiracy Files
exactly what they are.
programs.
They are hit pieces.
I mean, you know, as you say, you see, the thing with, we just stay on 7/7 for a second. The authorities came out with this single frame photograph, and it's the only frame of CCTV that's got a proper timestamp on it. And the reason why they've brought that out, or at the time, was to place the four men at that location in order to back up their story. But that is a clear fake. The photograph has been faked. Now, that is a huge crime in itself. It's fabricating evidence. It's perverting the course of justice. And this is what they have done. Yet, BBC Conspiracy Files comes along, oh, the official story is all true. It's just not on, is it?
But again, you know, that harks back to what we were talking about advertising, and because it comes from the BBC, it comes from a position of authority, and so people will go, oh, well, fair enough, that's reasonable. It's like when a doctor gets behind something. 9 out of 10 doctors agree with this. Which 9 out of 10 doctors? You know, what's the agenda behind these people? What are they trying to promote? You know?
Yeah, and we were also talking earlier, you know, we're saying how popular culture is controlled.
Absolutely.
But you believe that there's evidence that even the rebellious end of popular culture was controlled in the 60s and 70s.
Sadly, absolutely, yeah. If you read David McGowan's excellent blogs or his fine book, Program to Kill, basically he talks about the fact that all of the Laurel Canyon artists, the sort of the inception of the hippie movement in Haight-Ashbury,
Flower power and psychedelia and all of that.
They've all the sort of main players of that, you know, Frank Zappa, the Mamas and the Papas, Graham Parson, Hendrix, you know, Jim Morrison. They've all got intimate links to the military-industrial complex. Jim Morrison's father was Joint Chiefs of Staff. He was responsible for the Gulf of Tonkin, another mind control incident, another propaganda incident.
So you would contend that the introduction of LSD into popular culture was planned by the likes of the CIA then?
Well, it was actually planned by Tavistock, but it was obviously because it was done in America. It was, you know, it was obviously through the CIA, as we've said, all these interwoven sort of things.
So what would be the reason why they would want to do that?
Well, Jim Keith, he says that Aldous Huxley, basically, he was the person that spearheaded the Tavistock, Aldous Huxley, writer of Brave New World. He spearheaded the Tavistock LSD explosion in America, and basically they were using artists like the Laurel Canyon artist to promote the use of this. And he said that basically it could be used as a euphoric drug similar to Soma in his book. And he said, let us consider another type of drug capable of making people feel happy in situations where they would normally feel miserable. By making a harmless chemical euphoric freely available, a dictator could reconcile an entire population to a state of affairs which self-respecting human beings ought not. You know, so
you think that when they've started this hippie culture with LSD and everything, do you think that they planned another step of that, perhaps, to introduce it to the wider population to control them, or do you think do you think that was just an experiment introducing it, or?
I mean, I think both. You know, basically, they used people like Jerry Garcia of the to promote the use of this, and he said that basically it could be used as a euphoric drug similar to soma in his book. And he said, let us consider another type of drug capable of making people feel happy in situations where they would normally feel miserable. By making a harmless chemical euphoric freely available, a dictator could reconcile an entire population to a state of affairs which self-respecting human beings ought not. You know, so
you think that when they've started this hippie culture with LSD and everything, do you think that they planned another step of that, perhaps, to introduce it to the wider population to control them, or do you think do you think that was just an experiment introducing it, or?
I mean, I think both. You know, basically, they used people like Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. Grateful Dead were one of the bands that basically promoted LSD to the masses. Jerry Garcia was a CIA agent. He wasn't a musician that became a CIA agent. He was a CIA agent that was told to pick up a guitar. Right?
The CIA told him to learn the guitar so he could infiltrate the...
1968 FBI memo confirmed that Jerry Garcia was a CIA agent and that the Grateful Dead were employed to channel youth dissent and rebellion to more benign and non-threatening ways.
Right.
You know, even...
So, in other words, you see, we can come on to John Lennon, because obviously he is a key figure in all of this.
Yeah. Even Timothy Leary. Timothy Leary, who was the Tune In, Turn On, Drop Out, all of his LSD experiments, which are basically there for the empowerment of people, the spiritualist spiritualist movement, they're all sponsored by the CIA at the behest of Aldous Huxley of Tavistock. So all these counterculture heroes, basically, if you're in a big acidy funk, you're not critically analysing, you're not doing anything, you're easily controlled.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people who, are into all of that stuff, they think they're being radical and rebellious and that they're against the government, but actually they're being dumbed down, really, aren't they?
If you're a rebel, you've X'd yourself from society. If you've X'd yourself from society, you've got no forum to rebel. And the final person I'd like to talk about is Michael Hollingshead, who was he was Timothy Leary's guru. He was the person that got Timothy Leary involved with acid. He was also an MI5 agent, and he was the person that provided the Beatles with acid. Right. So what we're doing is we're popularising drug use. I mean, you've also got to remember, who sells the drugs? Who manufactures the drugs? It's the CIA. Okay, and that's provable. That's absolutely 100% provable. They're the biggest drug dealers in the world.
In Afghanistan as well, with heroin.
Well, this is another psyop. We better be over there to stop this heroin coming out of the region. There was no heroin coming out of the region until we were there.
Yeah, exactly.
The
heroin production went up when America took control of Afghanistan.
You've got soldiers coming back saying that they are being employed to protect the poppy fields. Okay, they're saying this. They're not lying. They're telling you the truth. Yeah. It's just whether like we said before, it's not about facts. It's about public perception.
All right, then, Neil. Well, we're going to take another break, and after the break, we're going to come on to the Manchurian candidates. Don't go away.
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories. The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
We are talking with Neil Saunders, who is a researcher of mind control. Now, we mentioned John Lennon, and we all know he was killed by sort of a lone gunman.
Yeah,
he was a highly influential man who was part of popular culture. So you believe Lennon was shot by a Manchurian candidate. Could you just explain first what a Manchurian candidate is?
A Manchurian candidate, it comes from the film Manchurian Candidate, but it also comes from sort of Eastern, Korean, Chinese, Manchurian mind control techniques, and it's sort of an amalgamation. It's not strictly accurate. What it would basically mean is a mind-controlled assassin, somebody that either does or does not know that they're doing it, and basically a trained assassin. And we know that these exist because basically, like we spoke about on the previous show, Thomas Narut and various other J.G. Watkins talks about the fact that these people can be made, these people can be manufactured, and they can be made to go against their moral codes and
to kill people.
Absolutely.
Manchurian candidates, am I right in thinking that they often terminate their own lives?
Yes. Well, basically, as I say, Michael Tsarian has actually done a lot of that. And it sort of adds credence to the idea, you've got these people that are going off and performing acts that, for whatever reason, they've got quite a lot of meaning to them, but then they never want anybody to find out what this meaning is. They'll just kill themselves in the woods, or they'll kill themselves just before the police come in. The police will sit around for hours on end, not interfering, and then the person kills themselves.
Right. So how would someone be programmed to be a Manchurian candidate?
Well,
would they be hypnotized, or what?
You could. I mean, there's various techniques, as we've discussed. There's harmonics, which is sort of subliminal, oral, things like that. There's hypnotism. There's electroshock and stuff like that. Usually, a lot of these lone nuts you'll find have spent quite a lot of time in military hospitals and such like that.
Right.
They've very possibly been in the military themselves. People like David Berkowitz, the son of Sam Killer, people like that. They've got intimate connections to the military. They were in the military. Timothy McVeigh, obviously, Lee Harvey Oswald.
So they've been programmed at some point.
Yeah, it's certainly
So what
possible.
about the Lenin killer then? Why do you think that he would be a Manchurian?
Well, I mean, himself, he spent a lot of time in sort of Waikiki Hospital, mental hospital, which is the known MK Ultra sort of testing ground. He had suspicious connections with certain people that would come in and out of his lives that may or may not have been MI5. He was often basically found to have quite a lot of accessible cash, no real sort of money. And you find this, basically, they're allowed to move around without any sort of real problems.
And of course, John Lennon was a thorn in the side for the establishment in America at the time he was shot, wasn't he? Because he was getting involved with certain black activists.
Well, yeah, aside from the fact that he was getting involved in the sort of Black Panther movements, equality.
And he had a huge following.
He had a huge following.
One of the biggest sort of artists of the century, really, wasn't
The
he?
CIA took him very, very seriously. If you read Mind Control, World Control by Jim Keith, he's got an entire chapter that talks about this. He was seen as one of the people that could channel dissent. He was seen as one of the people that basically could cause an uprising.
Yeah.
And essentially at the time it was about the Vietnam War. I think he had the idea that it was, I mean, aside from anything, it was a lie. We weren't supposed to be there. The Gulf of Tonkin incident was made up and such like that. Again, mind control. And he was definitely a thorn in the side. He was followed. He was arrested. His phone was tapped. It was made very clear to him on a number of times that basically, no, you are causing problems and you are being monitored.
Right, and what about other more up-to-date, let's talk about the Kennedy assassinations.
Well, Sirhan, is unbeknownst to a lot of people.
So who was that? Sorry, what was that name?
Sirhan is the person that was allegedly to have killed
Bobby Kennedy.
Bobby Kennedy, yeah. I mean, it was a physical impossibility for him to do it because there was something like 12 bullets fired. Basically, there were more bullets fired than were held in his gun.
Right.
He himself says that he can't remember doing it. He did it without thinking, and at least 3 psychiatrists, Dr. John Heiss, Dr. Herbert Spiegel, and several others, concluded that Sirhan was under some sort of hypnotic induction in a trance state, and he didn't know what he was doing. When he was arrested, I mean, he's a very tiny guy, a very slight guy. It took about 10 guys to wrestle him to the floor because somehow he had this sort of superhuman strength. And a similar thing happened with Mark Chapman, basically. Mark Chapman stood, after shooting Lennon, stood there reading The Catcher in the Rye, which a lot of people have suggested is his trigger. This is the thing that triggers his alternate killer personality.
Because that's the key thing in hypnosis, isn't it, in control, is a word which will trigger that person into...
Interestingly, Mark Chapman was reading A Catcher in the Rye. John Hinckley, after he tried to assassinate President Reagan, was stood there reading A Catcher in the Rye.
Right.
John Hinckley, his family was intimately connected with the Bush family. Neil Bush was having dinner with John Hinckley's father at the very same time that John Hinckley was trying to kill his boss, the president.
Right. Now, what about serial killers? Because you believe that there are several serial killers who have been convicted that we all know about, that were in fact Manchurians.
Yes.
Who would they be then?
Well, people like Henry Lee Lucas, Ted Bundy very possibly, David Berkowitz. Charles Manson certainly incorporated mind control techniques. I mean, if you look at the way that the power that he had over his cult, that is, how did a 33-year-old man that's not been out of prison more than 5 years in his entire life learn these incredible induction techniques?
Right.
The other thing is you've got to realise about these Henry Lee Lucas, Charles Manson, if you look at their lifestyle, it's the quintessential MK Ultra trauma-based, you know, who were sent to school trauma-based, you know, who were sent to school dressed as women, that were constantly raped as a child, they were traumatized, and this sort of thing. The use of LSD, particularly in the Charles Manson cult and stuff like that. And what you'll find a lot of the time is that these killings, there's a lot more to it than, I mean, let's just look at Roman Polanski for a start, okay? Sirhan was a friend of Roman Polanski, coincidence. Bobby Kennedy was at Roman Polanski's house the day before he was shot. I'm sure that's a coincidence. Sharon Tate was a friend of Charles Manson. She'd been seen going to the ranch which was owned by a film company. You know, Charles Manson was friends with Neil Young. He was friends with the Beach Boys. He was an influential figure in this Haight-Ashbury, and mysteriously he arrived there at exactly the same time that all these other people did.
Right.
You know?
Right, we'll come a little bit more up to date now, and I'll just mention a few perhaps UK cases that possibly may have been mind control candidates. And one would be Dunblane, where many people believe that, was it Hamilton?
Thomas Hamilton.
Thomas Hamilton was possibly mind controlled, and that the possible motive for his, you know, killing all of those innocent children was that those children were possibly part of it being abused by paedophiles.
Yeah, the paedophile sex ring.
In an establishment paedophile ring, and had been starting to tell their teacher what was going on. Yeah. And that was why he was programmed, you know, to do that. I mean, what do you think about that?
I think it's certainly possible. I think it's very, very similar to the McMartin preschool trial case in America, where basically, you know, again, people are coming in and saying, oh, these poor children, they've got false memories, they're making it up. And it's not true. Basically, there were tunnels underneath the McMartin preschool that led to satanic ritual sites. They found the skinned body of a baby underneath this site, and they found receipts that proved that these tunnels had been filled in. Like, there are connections, and there are connections to mind control. It's like what we were talking about earlier. These children can be used and sold in basically the white slave trade. They can be used in satanic ritual. Yes. They can be used to turn into MK Ultra, and they can be used for blackmail.
So we've come back to the connection between children and mind control, haven't we?
Yeah.
Which, you know...
The thing about the Thomas Hamilton case is that you've got to look at all the officials that basically swept in and caused the investigation to sort of tie up very, very quickly. I mean, I think you're right. I think it is to do with the sort of paedophile case. A lot of people were saying, oh, this is just a very easy way to control guns and, you know, get handguns out of the English, which is very true as well, you know. But again, with a lot of these serial killers, you find that you've got one or two hits, assassinations for a specific reason, and they muddy the waters by attaching other killings to them.
So the Manchurian Candidate might kill 10 people, and there's one or two of them is the ones they wanted rid of, and because they've killed so many people, no one can see a motive.
Yeah, and David Berkowitz, for a start, okay, one of those people was killed because it was a connection to... One of the son of Sam killings was because she found out about a cult. One was because they burned a Hollywood producer over cocaine, and so he was killed as a response. And the very first killing was to be filmed and distributed for snuff purposes. You know, and again, all these things intertwine, and then you've got certain other killings around that muddy the waters.
There's always far more to these mass killings than people realise. I am 100% sure of that. And I was on a plane when you know, the Derek Bird incident happened, and we were sitting next to some people, and I overheard a conversation. The guy was reading the Daily Mail or something like that, and he said, he tapped his mate on the shoulder, and he said, oh, you know what the real motive was, don't you? You know what the reason was? The guy was upset about his will.
Yeah, that would be it.
You know, and I thought, how naive, right? Because I believe that in that case, I think he was most likely a Manchurian Candidate.
I think it's certainly possible.
And I looked at the victims, and one of the victims, the second person killed, was Kevin Commons, the guy's solicitor.
Yes.
And I don't think he would have been administering Derek Bird's will, because there was several officers he had. He owned the whole solicitor's practice. Yeah. But he was in the process of legal action against United Utilities, who were responsible, or allegedly responsible, for the floods which took place in Cumbria, in which one man died. Yeah. Now, he believed, Kevin Commons, that they were responsible for those floods because they hadn't managed the level of a reservoir correctly. Now, I'm digressing a bit here, but what I'm saying is there's a clear motive by a very large company that has connections to
quiet
possibly get rid of that
yeah.
solicitor.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody's looked at that.
No, why would you? Because we've been presented with this very, very, very sort of neat, like with 9/11, doesn't
Yeah.
quite make sense, but it's
Yeah.
neat enough, it's Hollywood enough for us to say we've got a start, we've got a finish, we've got a middle, and that satisfies all, because most people aren't interested in it. Most people, why would they want to go out and start investigating these things? I've got products to buy. I'm far too busy to be investigating all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's the tragedy.
Yeah, I need to watch Skating on Shite tonight. Okay then, Neil, thank you very much indeed for coming
Thank you.
on board. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and hopefully we're going to have a few pints now.
Yes, lovely.
All right, thanks very much.
Thank you.
In this show, Neil Sanders talked about mind control. In the previous one, which you can watch again from the richplanet.net website, he described physical techniques to control subjects' minds and effectively program them for specific purposes. These techniques to directly control a mind include psychotronics, whereby very small, remotely controlled devices called implants are inserted into the brain and can make the person do whatever the implant is telling them. Other techniques include control by microwave radiation, extra-low frequency radiation, and also drugs, and of course, hypnosis. My interviews with Neil Sanders were well timed, because a TV documentary entitled Madness in the Fast Lane, screened recently on BBC, telling the story of two Swedish women, could well be describing the effects of both direct mind control of the women and indirect mind control of the population, with the production of the documentary itself. I will briefly describe what happens in the documentary, but recommend you watch Madness in the Fast Lane from the BBC website. It is not often I point people to this propagandist website, but it is necessary to watch this so that viewers understand what is most likely going on here, which is certainly not what was put forward in the documentary. I will briefly describe the story. In May 2008, the two Swedish women were seen on traffic CCTV walking up the central reservation of a motorway in the UK. Both of them then start running out in front of oncoming motorway traffic. A police car nearby, which just so happened to have a BBC film crew in it, attended the scene. When they got there, the women were on the hard shoulder, apparently in perfect health. Suddenly, one of the women runs out into the motorway, seemingly under the wheels of a speeding lorry, although it is clear that many frames were removed from the footage, so we do not really see the lorry doing any damage. The police try to stop her, but she pulls away from them and into the road. Shortly after this, the second woman does exactly the same. Again, frames are removed from the BBC film, and she is seen lying in the middle of the road. The police then attend to what they expect could be two fatalities. One of the women then gets up off her feet, removes her jacket, and starts having a fight with one of the cops. The other woman then also tries to get up and shouts out, "They will take your organs." The documentary states that the women are 41-year-old identical twins and are Swedish. After the police eventually deal with the situation and the women are let out of custody, one of them goes on to murder an ex-RAF serviceman, who she meets in a street and then later stabs him to death at his home with a knife. She walks away from the attack, hitting herself repeatedly over the head with a hammer. She is currently serving a sentence for murder. Towards the end of the documentary, a professor appears who explains to the audience the two different explanations put forward by the defense and prosecution when trying to explain the psychology of the Swedish women. The defense and prosecution allegedly tried to explain the bizarre behavior in two different ways, but both were suggesting that the women were suffering from some sort of rare psychological condition. One of these conditions was that the psychosis was contagious, and one woman caught the condition off her sister, which is why they both ran out into the road. At no point in the film did they even consider that the women were under some kind of mind control, which, when you look at the evidence presented by this film, is by far the most likely explanation in our view. So what then might be the point of such a documentary, which was very in your face, look at this? Miles Johnston, who has researched and interviewed victims of secret mind control programs, may have some of the answers. He believes, from people he has interviewed, that there are a range of very sinister projects being undertaken in secret underground facilities in the UK. One of the projects involves using organs from people who they have obtained. Another involves creating genetically engineered super beings, and he believes, without doubt, they are using psychotronics to program their subjects. If the military, or whoever runs these projects, wish to put out into the community their experiment for whatever purpose, it is possible that people would start to suspect what is going on. The BBC documentary would give people plausible denial for any future mind control subject which goes wrong or gets uncovered. So the BBC documentary could have been mind control in itself, ensuring that the public will not suspect that cases similar to this are in fact mind control victims. Oh, this is similar to those Swedish twins. The professor said that they were just mad. It was stated in the documentary that the two Swedish women were twins. I refer you to Sam Wright, who spoke at the beginning of this show about clones being used in the Vietnam War. Is it not perfectly plausible that these two women were genetically modified clones?
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall. By popular demand, this week's guest returns to the Starship for a third appearance, sharing some of his research into secret mind control projects, with links to psychological operations and the control and programming of celebrities. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. Neil Sanders.
Hello. How are you,
Welcome
Richard?
back.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me back.
Okay. Now, we're here to talk about mind control again. I mean, we touched on it in the previous interview.
Mm-hmm.
Can you start, Neil? Because you've been gathering more sort of information about the subject since you were on.
Yeah.
And can you give us an overview? Because a lot of people, they have no idea what you mean by mind control.
Sure. Okay. I mean, what most people refer to when they're talking about mind control, that you'll hear the word MK Ultra spoken again and again and again. MK Ultra was essentially one of the American mind control projects. It started in 1953, Technical Service Division by Sidney Gottlieb. What they were really sort of initially involved with was trying to get sort of truth serums and things that they could extract information from, foreign spies for espionage purposes. But it grew on to be Manchurian candidates, controlled assassins, hypno-programming, which basically means that you can impart a large amount of information into somebody without them knowing and then use that for espionage purposes. And then later it was sort of used, these people were used as literally mind-controlled slaves to be used perhaps in sexual purposes for blackmail techniques and stuff like that. And what mind control means is either an external or an internal control of the thoughts and processes of another person.
So when this was, because it stemmed from the Nazi research, didn't it?
Yeah, a lot of it.
Mind control and...
Yeah,
that's where the MK
comes from, minds and controlling us,
and
basically. So yeah,
some of the paperclip scientists that defected from Nazi Germany to the CIA, took some of what they had found?
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of it was, as we talked on in the previous show, was based on sort of trauma bonding, which Josef Mengele was very, very interested in. And obviously, at places like Dachau and Auschwitz, they were testing people with mescaline and electroshock and sleep deprivation, isolation tanks, and things like this. And basically, the process of mind control works by shattering the mind to cause dissociation, so that essentially the brain is split into separate personalities, or alters, as they would be called. And often these compartments don't have knowledge of each other. They feel that they are the entire person. They may have an implanted background, or maybe not even think that. A lot of people sometimes basically find out that they've been part of these programs because they suddenly realise, I've got 10 years of my life missing, or something like that, or I cannot put myself in any place at this given time.
Some people would say, well, in a Western democracy, how can this possibly be going on? How can this be being sanctioned by our democratic, tax money, well, into programming someone to be something that they inherently aren't? Surely this was an evil thing done by the Nazis, and when it, surely how would the American democratic system or the British system allow this to? How are they allowed to do it?
Well, first off, they don't care. This is the point. Your tax pounds, pence, dollars, they're being used right now to murder children in the Middle East. Okay, they just simply do not care. I mean, the thing.
When you say they don't care, you're not talking about. Are you talking about David Cameron, or are you talking about Barack Obama? Simply, who doesn't care?
I think the powers that be. This is the thing that you find when you're sort of looking at the mind control, is it's not simply American or German or English. A lot of these things are intertwined, and so you get the impression that perhaps there's a cabal maybe above the concept of nation states. But I mean, even for example, the CIA, it knew that the activity that it was doing was illegal. In 1957, there was a memo sent to the Inspector General Lyman, and he basically said that precautions must be taken.
So if you read that for us, Neil. So this is as early as 1957.
Well, I mean, it started prior to this, but, in 1957 they sent a memo that said precautions must be taken, not only to protect the operatives from exposure to enemy forces, but also to conceal these activities from the American public in general. The knowledge that the agency is engaged in unethical and illicit activities would have serious repercussions in political and diplomatic circles and would be detrimental to the accomplishment. What they're really bothered about is the accomplishment of the thing. They don't really care that it's, being used against the will with unknowing experimentees and stuff like that. For example, in Creedmoor State Hospital, there was a children's ward of 450 patients aged from 4 to 15. And
this is in the United States?
This is in the United States. And basically what they were doing, they were using LSD training on these children. These are very, very, very young children. They're giving them LSD, psilocybin, UML, which is like a methylated...
Right. So is this... So how many people in the democratic government would know that this hospital is being used to experiment on children in America?
It's difficult to say, but many, many, many universities, hospitals, and institutions were used for this. I mean, if you look at the people that were involved in it, George Estabrooks and Ewan Cameron and William Sargent, these are the very, very cream of the psychological world. Ewan Cameron was director of the Board of World Psychology at one point. William Sargent is basically, head of Thomas Hospital London and Tavistock Institute programs like that. These are very, very eminent psychologists, scientists, and people like that are using it. In top level of the military, you've got Michael Aquino, John B. Alexander, and people like this, who are very, very, very well thought of within their circles, and they're aware of it.
All right, Neil, well, what we've done, we've actually, or you've named some of the projects which are known about.
Yeah.
The sort of code names.
Yeah.
And, clearly there are probably projects that no one has ever known about, but I'll just list the names. We've got MK Ultra, which originated in the Nazi Germany. We've got Project Monarch, which we'll come on to. We've got Project Phoenix, Montauk, and then we've got the UK project, which is Project Mannequin, an alleged project.
And possibly Talent as well, which is another one that people have spoken about.
Okay, and you think that all of these projects have got sub-projects within them?
Well, this is the thing. Like, basically, when people talk about MK Ultra, they basically mean mind control. They could actually mean Artichoke, Bluebird, Chatter, MK Delta. They've got various different names. It's just basically simpler if we term them under MK Ultra. Claudia Mullin, who's a very famous sort of victim of these mind control experiments, basically She spoke to a US Presidential Advisory Board in 1995, and she was taken by Sidney Gottlieb. She was an already abused child. She was taken when she was 7, and she was subjected to electroshock, LSD, various other chemicals and stuff like that. When she was 9, she was taken to Maryland under the supervision of the American government to be trained as a prostitute. Okay,
right.
This is a 9-year-old.
At the age of 9?
Yes, 9. You know.
I mean, so was this Project Monarch?
No, this was actually a sub-project of MK Ultra called Artichoke, and we know this to be fact because basically she spoke about this in open court. And what?
So was this in the mid-90s, where there was a number of women who tried to sue the government for being used in mind control projects?
Yeah, Linda MacDonald, Claudia Mullin, several others, and you can find this all on the internet. This, you know.
So what would somebody need to type into Google in order to find these? Because there were open hearings where there were cameras, wasn't there?
Linda MacDonald, Claudia Mullin. There you go. Start off with those.
Google those names, and you will be able to find them giving testimony in a court, trying to basically bring the American government to account over secret mind control.
Well, what Claudia Mullin said was that basically she was used as sort of an entrapment. Basically, she'd be used as a 9-year-old prostitute, and she'd be used to lure and blackmail politicians, heads of academia, you know, popular celebrities and people like that, you know, just to get them into a position where we've filmed you with this 9-year-old girl.
Right, so at some point in the politicians, you know, maybe on business or whatever, this 9-year-old will be offered to them, who would then, you know, do whatever, and they would be filmed.
Yes, secretly filmed.
And then it's a way of then controlling that politician.
Yeah, basically they're now in your pocket. And basically she was very, very accurate with a lot of her things. She spoke about Sidney Gottlieb. She accurately described him. She spoke about, well, she didn't speak about Ewan Cameron. Ewan Cameron was the mind control doctor that was interested in sort of sleep deprivation. So depatterning was what he called it, basically wiping a mind so that you can implant a new. And he was sued, well, the board of governors was sued by Linda MacDonald, and she actually got a sizable amount of money because it was proved that they did do these experiments. What happened was basically Claudia kept speaking about, to her therapist and a lawyer, about this person called the cameraman, who would, a Scottish person that would speak, that would call her lassie all the time. And years later, it was Valerie Wolfe, who was her solicitor. She was basically watching some stock footage of CIA doctors, and somebody exactly as Claudia Mullin described, with a Scottish accent, who kept calling people lassie, came on the screen, and this turned out to be Ewan Cameron, who's the sort of famous MK Ultra doctor. So again, it adds credence to her story.
Right. So this is one reason why you know, a cabal might want to control somebody is to let them have sex with an underage person who's under mind control, and they then get control of that politician.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there any cases known where, let's say, that's happened to a leader, but that leader has then said, right, well, you're not going to control me, I'm going to do what I want anyway, and then they have to then bring out that evidence in a court? Do you see what I mean? In order to sort of carry out the threat.
Yeah, they've got to sort of expose them. It probably has, but not to my... The one that I know about, it's not exactly what you're saying about, is Paul Benassi. And this was to do with the Franklin conspiracy, which was the Franklin Savings and Loans. It was a saving credit union in Omaha, Nebraska. And basically, Larry King, who was the rising star...
Larry King, he's the... Well, probably the most prominent chat show host.
No, not the chat show host Larry King. Right. Lawrence King, Larry King, he was a Republican senator.
All right, so different Larry King.
Yeah, different Larry King. And what happened was he was basically running, or it was alleged that he was running a child sex ring through a charity called Boys Town. Now, what happened was basically he was found to have defrauded or helped to defraud $40 million from the Savings and Loan Unit in Franklin. Now, Senator John DeCamp investigated with this, and basically what happened was Paul Benassi was one of the kids that came forward. There was over 80 children that came forward and basically said, this is what's happened, we've been taken from this charity and we're being used as sex slaves. But it was worse than that, because Paul Benassi was basically saying that he was employed, so to speak, as a mind-controlled operative to find children on order for paedophiles and to assist in kidnapping them. Basically what he would do, he would be going to a playground with a pocket full of sweets or whatever, go around the corner dragging these kids around there, and which time there'd be a black van or whatever, and 2 CIA operatives would bag over the kid and steal them. And you know, one of the cases that this sounds outrageous, but basically it was taken to a court case, and Paul Benassi was actually awarded £1 million in damages, saying that the judge, who was Judge Urbaum, wrote, "The King continually subjected the plaintiff Paul Benassi to repeated sexual assaults, false imprisonments, organised and directed satanic rituals, and he was forced to scavenge for children to be part of the defendant King's sexual abuse and pornography ring." Okay, he was forced to go into masochistic orgies with other children. Okay, he has multiple personality disorder and has 14 distinct personalities. Okay, now what's important to notice is that Lawrence King was not found guilty of any of these sexual crimes. He was found guilty of the defrauding. But basically what that does is it vindicates. Paul Benassi was essentially put in jail for perjury, and there was another girl called Alicia Owens who was actually allegedly made pregnant by the local sheriff during this sort of incident.
So you think, I mean, what they use small boys if the person happens to be homosexual? Is that what you like a rent boy type scenario?
Well, yeah, I would assume so. I mean, the case of Johnny Gosh, which is again, I'd suggest people Google Johnny Gosh, is Gosch, and he was a paper boy. I'm not sure, he may have been from Nebraska. I might have got that wrong. Basically, he went missing, and Paul Benassi came out in court and said he was the person that helped kidnap Johnny Gosch. Johnny Gosch apparently turned up many years later, spoke to his mother, and he's not revealed his sort of whereabouts for his own safety, but his mother went into court and in open court stated that her son was kidnapped by the US government for use in mind control and sexual, entrapment sort of cases and things like that. And again, this was in court, and during this, Paul Benassi mentioned Michael Aquino, who we spoke about on the previous thing. Basically, Michael Aquino, who was termed the Colonel, was involved allegedly in buying Johnny Gosch. They were basically, this is an organised thing where they would sort of have a catalogue of kids, they would kidnap the kids to order, and then they would use them either for sex, pornography, snuff films, or other things. I mean, Paul Benassi made
So what is a snuff film? Explain what that is.
The snuff film is basically a pornographic film, or it's a film in which the participant does not know that they're going to be killed and is killed on camera. It's like an on-camera murder. And people will tell you it's a myth that these things don't exist. They do exist. They were found in the Belgian Parliament. Okay,
So, I mean, in a snuff film, who are they killing in these? Just unknown people? Or
yeah, unknown people. Or, that's the thing. Somebody will come on and it's someone being tortured to death in the video. Now, Paul Benassi...
So just to stop you there, Neil, what would be the point of making a snuff film?
For pleasure, for the, perverse pleasure of who's watching it. It's either, I don't know, to get some sexual thrill out of it, or it's just the concept of this is a forbidden thing, this is really taboo and dark, That's I couldn't possibly say why people...
Well, are you saying that... I mean, we're saying that that a cabal is controlling or programming these children to be prostitutes, okay,
yes,
for a particular purpose, which we've just discussed.
Yeah.
But the snuff film, are you saying that a cabal which exists above government is also making snuff films
for distribution, for sale, and just for fun? Essentially,
right.
And what Paul Benassi said was basically that he was at Bohemian Grove and watched snuff films being made. Now, he alleges, and this is in the Franklin Conspiracy documentary, that Hunter S. Thompson, the famous journalist, was actually filming it. And I don't know about that, but shortly after this revelation, Hunter S. Thompson killed himself. So, who knows? Who knows? Paul Benassi also mentions, and what I suggest is you find the Gunderson Chronicles, which is an excellent... He's been interviewed by Ted Gunderson. He mentions George H.W. Bush. He says he talks about numerous drug-taking and paedophilic activities performed by the former president, former head of the CIA, that he says he's witnessed. I mean, if he's been sort of vindicated...
I guess we have to say that this is alleged by...
It's alleged by Paul Benassi, but,
We're not stating that that's the fact, we're saying that this person alleged.
This person has said it, this is not me. So.
I mean, would the snuff films not be used as bribery of some kind?
Yeah, very possibly as well. Right. Who knows what this sort of use... I mean, the other thing is that basically the sort of satanic element of them in the sort of the trauma-based, you know, if we're breaking down personalities and things like that, we've seen how, like, you know, the military's got links to the Temple of Set through Michael Aquino and stuff like that. Perhaps these rituals, I mean, there's several things. Rituals, sort of repeated rituals, basically, in the same way that television drops you into an alpha state brainwave.
Yes.
Mantras, dogma, singing hymns, that sort of thing, because you're basically doing the same thing, it also drops you in the same thing. So I suppose you could be programmed that. Also, the sort of the trauma of the satanic ritual abuse. And the other thing that happens as well is that basically, because you need to sort of be abusing and destroying these kids in these rituals or whatever, they'll have people dress up with a Mickey Mouse mask or as a devil or something like that. And so when they tell their parents or the police or whoever, Mickey Mouse touched me inappropriately, it sounds like it's made up.
Yes. Well, very disturbing stuff, Neil. We're going to go for a short break now. And after the break, we're going to touch on some of the other projects, Project Monarch, Project Phoenix, Montauk, and Mannequin. So don't go away. Welcome back on board the Starship. I'm talking with Neil Sanders, and we've been touching on some alleged mind control projects. Now, we discussed MK Ultra before the break. Neil, just can you give us an overall one paragraph? What was MK Ultra? Or is it too broad to define?
Well, this is the thing. Well, for a start, okay, the MK Ultra is a fact. Okay, we've got declassified documents. Basically, it's stuff like programming children to be assassins, programming people to have different personalities, multiple personalities, programming people for truth serums, and programming people so that it can be used as photographic memories for couriers, for espionage and stuff like that.
So we come on to another project, Project Monarch.
Yes.
Was that a CIA project?
Well, this is the thing. You see, whereas MK Ultra has basically been released in 1977, Ted Kennedy spoke to the Senate about it, and you know, Clinton's apologised for it. It's official. Monarch is one of these projects that is rumoured. Like Fritz Springmeier wrote about Monarch, has created an Illuminati mind-controlled slave, and basically he speaks about people like Jar Jar Gabor and Marilyn Monroe and Jay Mansfield being part of it. The sort of people that have come forward saying that they are part of Monarch are Bryce Taylor and Kathy O'Brien. What Monarch is the female sex slave program. These are girls that have basically usually come from some multi-generational incest families, usually possibly with a sort of satanic link to it as well. And they're utilised by the government, and their personalities are broken down. By the time they become adults, what they are termed is presidential models. Now, this will be very attractive blonde girls that are usually sort of sex slaves that can be used for blackmail or they can be used for espionage. One of them was basically Bryce Taylor. She wrote the book Thanks for the Memories.
Bryce Taylor, so people can Google that name?
Yeah. Bryce Taylor claims that basically she was, her father was actually under CIA programming, and since birth she was into this family where she was being set up for it. She was taken as a child and used in child pornography and, you know, sex trade and prostitution and stuff like that. And she claims that she was trained at military bases all across the way. Right. When she was older, she became what's termed a presidential model, which is essentially a sex slave and a personal computer. You know, you basically, the girl will walk into a room and she's remembered every aspect which she can then relay back using photographic memory. She names Bob Hope, the comedian Bob Hope, as her handler. She says that basically entertainment was a hobby of his, it was just a front, he was actually part of an espionage group that was there for sort of world control. She also names Ronald Reagan as using her. She also says that Henry Kissinger, or Heinz Kissinger, as was exposed by Christopher Story. I mean, this is interesting because Henry Kissinger is essentially a triple agent. He worked for Germany, Russia and England, which... Or alternatively,
England, not US.
Sorry, US. Or perhaps do they all work together? That's the question. But basically, he was the owner of her mind files, which is all the sort of stored espionage files, all the sort of knowledge that she's gained on popular figures, celebrities, and stuff like that. And Bryce Taylor claims that she was often used at parties with Hugh Hefner at the Playboy Mansion. Now, this is quite interesting because if
Hugh Hefner, who's Hugh Hefner?
Hugh Hefner is the well, he's related to the Bush family. And basically, he's the magnate of Playboy, Playboy magazine. He owns the Playboy Mansion.
All right.
Now, if you watch Girls of the Playboy Mansion, like, which is a program, it's like a reality TV show that shows, like, I mean, aside from anything, they're all blonde. They're all blonde, which is the look of Playboy. But if you could go into the symbolism of the Easter Bunny and stuff like that if you really want to do. The point is, if you look at these girls on the girls of the Playboy Mansion, you become sort of transfixed. You sort of look at this, and you notice that their eyes, they're very wide. They're very sort of. All these girls look like they've been under post-traumatic stress disorder and stuff like that. This is purely speculation, but I was looking at sort of Madeleine McCann and pictures of Madeleine McCann. If you cover up her eyes, like cover up the photo, it doesn't matter if she's smiling or everything. Look at the eyes and see if that's a happy child or if that's a traumatised child.
So you're getting into controversial areas here now.
That's just speculation.
Well, I mean, can we go there? I mean, it's
probably not.
We'll leave Madeleine McCann out of it, I think.
Yes. But I mean, the thing about Bryce Taylor was he was backed up by a researcher called Walter Bower, who wrote Operation Mind Control, which is really difficult to get hold of now. Basically, he saw Bryce Taylor on several occasions with Bob Hope as a sort of cocktail waitress, sort of part of his entourage, which sort of adds credence to her story.
So, all right, and so the other people who are rumoured to have been involved in Project Monarch are
Cathy O'Brien.
Cathy O'Brien. You mentioned Michael Jackson before.
Well, Michael Jackson is sort of. It's in the sort of public domain that Michael Jackson suffers from dissociative identity disorder, as does Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan, which we'll get onto.
Britney Spears and Lindsay Lohan.
Yeah. Dissociative identity disorder is essentially, multiple personality, which is what they were trying to achieve to sort of get this, to get this spy or whatever involved. And basically she claims that Bob Hope sponsored the Jacksons. And that on several occasions, Joe Jackson, who's Michael Jackson's father, would take the Jackson 5 to meetings with influential businessmen and essentially prostitute. Now, she claims that she's seen the Jackson 5 being prostituted by Bob Hope on behalf of Joe Jackson.
What do you mean by being prostituted?
Being sold for sex to businessmen. Like
so businessmen would have sex with the Jackson 5?
Yeah. Well,
really?
Apparently. Well, this is what she claims. I mean,
right.
Basically, Jermaine Jackson has come out in interviews and said that these meetings did take... He never says that there was sex involved, but he
right.
says that there were very strange meetings where his father would take Michael to visit important businessmen in hotels, and he'd be gone all night, and then he'd be ill, like physically ill, for days afterwards. I mean, he has got multiple personality disorder. It's alleged that he's got dissociative identity disorder.
So you think that Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan have at some point in their lives been taken to a facility, shall we say, a hospital, whatever, and hypnotised, been programmed using mind control techniques?
Yeah, and some people might say that basically so they found these celebrities and decided to think, no, I believe that they manipulated them into this character and
right.
then made them celebrities, to be quite honest. It's almost to sort of hide it in plain view.
So, hold on, let's get this right. So, what people would say is that people who are, famous, who have millions of people watching them, they become like that because
of the pressures of the fame.
Because of the pressures, they take drugs.
Yeah.
So they don't behave like ordinary people. Because they're on this pedestal.
Yeah. Well, I think
so you would contend that they have been picked out deliberately by somebody who's saying, right, you're going to be the next, famous person that children will look up to, and we're going to control you from day one.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Britney Spears, Marilyn Monroe, Madonna, Celine Dion, Tom Hanks, all related. All related.
So do you think that those people that you've just named, that they all have handlers?
Very possibly. I mean,
Tom Hanks?
It's one of those, isn't it? Some people will and some people won't. I actually think, there's a lot of evidence that even sort of people right at the top have got handlers, like Bill Clinton. There's the footage of Clinton possibly under hypnosis in between feeder at the White House and stuff like that. A lot of people have suggested that Michael Jackson had a handler, that it was a person called Majestic Magician, who was like his personal magician, basically.
So I guess would you say then that, let's assume that that's true, that some of these famous singers or what have you are being controlled, they're not in charge of their own decisions, shall we say,
well,
that the reason would be that they are influencing so many millions of young people that somebody else behind a veil will want to take control of that person and therefore manipulate the younger generation. Is that what you're saying is the purpose of it?
Well, let's look at the anti-panty set, right, which was basically well, this is what Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears, the anti-panty set. Lindsay Lohan, Britney Spears and Paris Hilton, in a short period of time, became very good friends and spent about 3 weeks wandering around LA, getting out of cars with no knickers, flashing their knickers.
So
Now,
not
knickers.
Anti-panty. This is like
This was reported
three
in-
famous stars.
Yeah, they're all
Sounds
sort
like
of,
an advert for
well,
women's products.
Well, I'm no prude, right? I really don't, I'm into ridiculously obscure Japanese horrors and stuff. I don't care about that sort of stuff. But when you've got, like, marketing, Christina Aguilera and Britney Spears and people like this, toddlers, 6 and 7-year-old girls who are singing back the lyrics. Let's examine NSYNC's lyrics, examine, all the boy band's lyrics, and they're singing to 13, 14-year-old girls, telling them about what they want to do to them and stuff like that. Again, I'm not a prude, but just be aware that what you're doing is you're sexualizing these kids younger and younger and younger and younger. And so, maybe that is there.
So we've got some footage of some of these celebrities, which are you saying that you think suggests they're under mind control?
Well, it's a fact. It's a reported fact that Britney Spears has got dissociative identity disorder. It's a reported fact that Lindsay Lohan has got dissociative identity disorder. She's got 2 completely separate personalities, one called Diane, one called Margot. Britney Spears has a personality that doesn't know who Britney Spears is, that speaks in an English accent, okay? And apparently when she was taken to see the Sinai's, when she had her breakdown, she spoke in an English accent all the way through and didn't know about who Britney Spears was. She shaved her head. I mean, that's the other thing. She shaved her head and everyone went, oh, she's on drugs, she's crazy. If you read accounts of Arizona Wilder, Kathy O'Brien, people like that, they shave their head when they break their programming, and it's to sort of sully their image, because if you think of them as like they're the sort of,
blonde hair.
Yeah, exactly. So what we're going to do is we're going to destroy that image, and so at least for a time being, I'm useless to them.
So we'll have a look at a clip now. This is the first one, I think, is Anna Nicole Smith.
The 9-year-old at one point switches the talking doll off to prove...
Tell us what's happening here, Neil.
Well, what this is, this was brought to my attention, this Freeman, of Freeman TV, did an excellent thing called Anna Nicole, Britney and Mind Control. What this is Anna Nicole Smith in embodying an alter personality. Now, people will look at this and say, oh, she's on drugs, she's stuff like that. She's not. Look at her mannerisms, look at the way she speaks, look at the way she moves and walks. She's a child. She is in the personality of a child. Now, people have tried to pass this off saying she's on drugs. What drugs? Get me some of that, because that's wicked, that is. Like, I've never seen anything that does that. That's amazing.
So what is it that she... Let's just take a look at it. So she's got a...
If you listen to the inflection of her voice, just listen to the way she talks, and watch the way that she runs across the courtyard.
So you think she's been programmed to be a child?
I think she has. Freeman claims that basically she's got lots of personalities. It would fit. She's a Playboy model. She's similar to Jar Jar Gabor, and there's even suggestions that she's vaguely related to Paris Hilton, who is, of course, Jar Jar Gabor's niece. But the Freeman basically claims that Howard K. Stern, who's the bloke that's filming her, is her mind control handler. And if you listen to the way that she's talking later, he says, oh, people think you've lost your mind. And she says, I haven't lost my mind. He says, oh, I'm kidding. He's winding her up. He knows what's going off. And what's really strange is there's another little girl there that's getting terrified. If you listen to this bit, watch this bit, she doesn't know where she is. Now, what they're doing on the news is they're trying to pass this off as, oh, she was drug addicted and such like that. The first autopsy, what's interesting as well is the beginning of this news report, it shows a picture of Anna Nicole Smith covered in vomit. That's her dead. Why are they showing her dead?
Yeah.
That's trauma shocking people, isn't it? But as I say, Freeman basically claims that she's famous for being a Playboy model that married Howard Marshall. Now, Howard Marshall was the 90-year-old oil magnate who it is suggested was probably an ex-Nazi that was given this girl, okay, to live out the last years of his life as like a present. Afterwards, there's a whole other conspiracy about the child. She's had a daughter who's going to inherit all the money. Who the father of that was a big court case. And this is where this footage came out, which is very, very strange because it was completely inadmissible as evidence. It's got nothing to do with the case. It was just shown. Now, as I say, people were saying that she was on drugs. The first autopsy that was done on Anna Nicole Smith proved that basically she wasn't on drugs. She'd not been on drugs for many, 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 many months. There was no evidence of it in a uterus or anything like that because she was pregnant at the time. None of that. The second autopsy showed that she died of a drug overdose. Now, interestingly, the second autopsy was, I forget the guy's name, but it was performed by the same person who did the second autopsy on John Benet Ramsey.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's suspicious then, you think?
Very, very suspicious. Completely suspicious.
Right. And there's a second clip here of Anna Nicole Smith.
This is just more of her as a clown. This is sort of this is the sort of bit that people might have seen where she doesn't really know what's going on. And she's almost being teased by Howard Stern. And the question is, why are you filming her? If this is his girlfriend who's heavily pregnant at the time, why is he traumatising another little girl by allowing his girlfriend to act crazy?
So this footage, was this footage sort of leaked then, or
Well,
did
no,
it come out
this
by
is
accident?
what didn't come out by accident. They played it in court.
Oh,
This
right,
was this on Fox or whichever channel it was, and basically they were discussing where Anna Nicole Smith was to be buried.
Yes.
And for no reason at all, they introduced this video, and it was said in court, this is inadmissible, it's pointless, and the judge says, I don't care, play it anyway. And it just showed that, and it was never really mentioned again. It was just shown.
Now this next one is Britney Spears. Tell us what's happening here.
Oh, this is the one where Britney Spears is basically took. Oh no, this is the one. You'll find this on the internet. This is perhaps an example of Britney Spears flicking between personalities. Basically, if you look halfway through a question, it's almost like she goes hello, hello, and it's almost as if she's doesn't know where she is. Now, people will pass that off. If you look at the comments on YouTube and stuff like that, people say, well, she's upset, she's in the public eye and stuff like that.
So just tell us when she flips personalities.
It'll be fairly obvious.
This spasm of publicity about what happened from Mexico to London.
It was pretty rough, yeah.
She doesn't know where she is.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Ah, weird. Hello. Oh my goodness. Hello. Ew. Strong Brittany. Yeah, it was a weird.
So she's back now, or?
Possibly. I mean, this is the thing. If you've got so many personalities in your head, basically, at the one point she says, hello, hello, weird, and she doesn't really know where she is. There was the famous performance when she sort of made her comeback on the MTV Awards, where everyone was saying, oh, look at her, she's so fat, she's so out of time. There was a dance bit where she's coming down some steps. I mean, obviously there's a certain Freemasonic symbolism to that anyway. But I swear, on this MTV Awards, halfway down the steps, she stops and goes, I don't know where I am. And then a couple of seconds later, and then after that, she's out of time and stuff like that. But I think there is evidence that basically, I mean, she grew up in a family that, euphemistically, it was said that we never wore clothes in our house. It just wasn't done. We always used to just walk around in the nude and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Courtney Love. Courtney Love,
perhaps families do that, though, don't they?
Of course they do, but again, it's all pieces to the puzzle, isn't it?
Right.
Courtney Love, basically, who's perhaps not the most trustworthy person in the world, but it's certainly interesting that she would say this. She wrote on her Facebook account on the day, I believe it was the day that basically Britney was cast off to hospital, she said, Britney's dad molested her. Imagine the father molested you, owning you for slavery, while you were forced to sing songs picked for their sexual content every night. Insane, right? But I have it on first-hand authority and fight as hard as she is, and yet she still did not pull that card. Basically, Courtney Love's suggesting that Britney's dad is perhaps a handler, or, you know, has certainly sexually abused her,
right,
and that she knows that Britney Spears knows this, or whatever. You know, again, it's all hearsay.
Is he a biological father, do you know?
I think so, but again, you don't really know. I mean, it's one of those, you could argue about this all day long, you know, who's Barbara Bush's biological father? Is it Aleister Crowley?
Yeah.
Certainly looks like it.
Right. So what's this next clip? Is this Britney Spears again, or?
This is Britney Spears talking in a British accent.
You say welcome here. Why is it taking so long to get caught? Why didn't you pull it up there? Oh, it's too much. And again, oh my God. Where is the car? I don't like it.
The suggestion is that basically when she's talking in this British accent, she doesn't actually know who Britney Spears is, and like this has been confirmed by various paparazzo. and so doctors at Cedars-Sinai Hospital. What's interesting, I mean, this is an aside, but when these people get into trouble, they go off to rehab. Britney Spears went to Crossroads Rehab. Now, if you know about the story of Robert Johnson and such like that, you sort of understand the symbolism of the Crossroads. I mean, this was actually named after, I think Eric Clapton was involved in it. But Lindsay Lohan went to the Wonderland Clinic. Now, if you understand Wonderland, and you understand that basically Alice in Wonderland programming and stuff for MK Ultra mind control, but also the Wonderland Gang. Now, the Wonderland Gang, it was basically culminated in a murder that involved John Holmes, the porn star. They were a child sex, pornography, prostitution and drugs ring that was basically had connections to American government and various other sort of sections, and expanded sort of, it was a huge operation that you know, again, you can research this Wonderland Gang, John Holmes murder. Like, look at that, okay, and you know, this symbolism creeps up again and again and again. Apparently Britney Spears, when she was actually in hospital, she shaved her head, she wrote 666 on her forehead. She said, "I am the Antichrist," and she tried to kill herself. Now, again, speculation, but both Cathy O'Brien and Bryce Taylor have basically said that within these alter personalities, you'll have like a suicide program, or if you start to remember too much, or you start to try and break your programming, you'll have an alter that is self-destructive.
All right.
So it's possible.
So just show us here, Neil, what do you why you've highlighted this clip?
Well, if you listen, they've actually on the screen they're showing it. All that speaking, this sort of cod British accent is Britney Spears, and it might be kind of laughable to us, you know, because obviously it's not a great British accent or whatever. But the point is that she doesn't break from it, like. And
is this when she keeps shouting things out?
Yeah, yeah. You know, she's using English inflections like, "Can you show me where the loo is?" and stuff like that. I mean, yeah, she could be trying it on, she could be doing it just to entertain herself and stuff like that, but it has actually been confirmed by several psychiatrists that she's got personality disorders.
So let's just say that, let's just go down the premise that you know, when she's in this situation here, she's in this British personality.
Yeah.
Why would she be in that British personality at that point?
Who knows?
Not in another personality.
Well, who knows? Who knows what the triggers are? Like, right. I mean, this is the thing.
So there's like, triggers to switch them from one to another.
Well, I mean that's a fact. Basically, there's a declassified document talking about. This was actually talking about MK Ultra, and basically, it was saying that in the 1950s, they were hypnoprogramming 19-year-old girls. And that they could be triggered over the phone. They could be triggered like with a word, a phrase, a symbol, a card, a colour. In the Manchurian Candidate, the film, the trigger is a card. It's the Queen of Hearts and stuff like that.
Yes.
That, if you understand hypnosis, basically anything can be a post-hypnotic suggestion. One thing that's interesting, if you look at celebrities on the red carpet, look at the left hand and see the amount of celebrities that are doing this action. Okay, and what that is, it's a post-hypnotic suggestion where you've sort of taken through hypnosis and you made you feel ultra confident, and that's a trigger. And when you do that, your brain, your subconscious remembers those positive emotions, and so what that is, it's a confidence-boosting thing. So you sat there pressing on your button, filling yourself with confidence. And so these are established methods.
All right, Neil. Well, again, disturbing stuff, but we're going to go for another short break, and after the break we're going to come a little bit closer to home. Well, no, we'll talk about Montauk first, and then Project Mannequin. So stay tuned. Welcome back on board the Starship. I'm talking with Neil Sanders, who's been researching mind control programs. Now, you were just explaining before the break, Neil, about doing this with your fingers. You're saying that what certain...
It's a post-hypnotic suggestion, and this is a very, very simple sort of thing. If you're sort of lacking confidence, if you go, you know, I've got to make a public speech, I've got to, you know, anything like that, sing in front of a crowd, you'll be sort of hypnotised and made to feel very, very confident. You'll have all your sort of feelings of empowerment and esteem, and you'll lock that in. It's called anchoring. What you do, you'll anchor it into like you know, an action, basically. So every time you do that, or whatever is the trigger...
Push your finger and thumb together.
Yeah, that'll be it, basically, or whatever it is. It could be scratching or anything. Like, when you do perform that action, it triggers those, subconsciously triggers those emotions. And, you know,
it makes you more confident or something like that.
Yeah, and this is like an established technique that's used by, you know, actors and things like that. You know, it's a very simple technique.
But just interrupt you there. So, but you would have to have gone under some hypnosis beforehand in order for that thing to work. Is that...
Well, it really depends on the sort of skill of the hypnotist. 9 times out of 10, yes, although there is sort of a thing called waking hypnotism, which is basically implanting suggestions without you noticing. Right. I mean, to be quite honest, I mean, George Estabrooks, who's the sort of the main MK Ultra hypnotist and stuff like that, also one of the most respected hypnotists in the world, he went against the popular sort of misconception that you can't be hypnotized against your will, and basically says that's rubbish. The power of the hypnotist is ultimate. The only things that limit the power of the hypnotist are his own scruples and his own skill.
Right.
So,
all right then. Well, we're going to discuss another alleged project, which is Project Phoenix. Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, the alleged part, the Phoenix program is sort of a political assassination and psyop program that was originally carried out in Vietnam during the war, obviously, and the concept of it was to sort of have groups that would go in and assassinate people that maybe weren't like generals or whatever, but were seen as supporters of the Viet Cong, or could be politically influential and stuff like that. And the official story is that it was a very, very, very organised political, like deep undercover political assassination group. Right. However, like if you actually look at the sort of methods that they were using, what it was really there for was to terrorise populations, to basically cause the population to submit. Right. Now,
Got an example of this?
One example is this was an interview with Dr. Alan Levin, Modern Medicine and Military Links. This is completely verbatim. So I volunteered for this Operation Phoenix, which was a psychological operation. It would make Charles Manson look like Abigail Van Buren. It was basically a psychological operation, and it was very well done. Americans have done it many times before, and in essence, we did it inadvertently in Libya. The theory is, you don't kill the leader, you kill his children, and you kill his family. Basically what I mean is you destroy the chief's family very ignominiously, and I mean ignominiously. I mean, Charles Manson would look like a sweetie compared to this stuff. So the guy comes back home, and he sees this mess, you know, his wife beheaded, her infant child stripped out of her abdomen, and then beheaded and shoved back in, bleeding into her body. There'd be entrails hung from the rafter, and there'd be shit all over the walls, those kinds of things. And that's how we do it. And when that happens, these guys lose confidence in themselves. And the village loses confidence in these guys because they don't die, they don't become a martyr, and so the entire operation loses his fighting will. That's the American way. And that's a direct quote from Alan Levin, who was involved in these programs.
And who did he work for? Was he?
Well, it's a CIA program. I mean, the thing
is, he was a CIA.
Well, I believe he was a doctor that was actually, used in, in these sort of things.
Of psychiatry, presumably.
Possibly.
Right.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, the thing is that basically, if you look at other incidents, the My Lai massacre, it has been alleged. Well, it was a Phoenix operation. It wasn't an assassination program. Basically, the sort of excuses, well, we were trying to assassinate a few guys, and all these civilians got in the way. It's not true. Basically, it was to terrorise the civilian population.
So they're using terrorism, basically.
Of course, they're using terrorism. Basically, another one that I've heard of is that they'd wait until all the men would leave the village, they'd go into the village, they'd find all the women and children, they'd behead them, and they'd set up a large dinner table in the middle of the village. They'd put all the women and children around this dinner table with their heads on plates facing them. And then they'd never, like, claim, basically, if you came home and found this, that's it, you're just traumatised forever. Yes, yes. And suddenly you don't feel like fighting anymore. Right. You know, and that's the
so
sort of...
these were methods which American intelligence were suggesting, or actually
no,
used?
they were actually using them.
In which conflicts?
Well, I mean, this is the thing, because they were definitely used in Vietnam.
Vietnam.
I mean, Bart Osborne, actually, he was an officer, he testified before Congress in 1971, he said that basically there was supposedly supposed to be interrogation techniques, but he never knew of a single person that was interrogated that survived. So most were either tortured to death or thrown from helicopters in front. Basically, you take somebody up, so we're going to interview this guy, take him up and just throw him straight out, and then you go down and say, right, we're going to interview you next, and you next, and you next, and everybody knows what's going to happen to them, and so they start spilling the beans or, you know, making stuff up. But the interesting thing is that basically it would appear that the Phoenix program was carried on not only in Vietnam, but in El Salvador and Nicaragua. Basically, sort of, if you do a bit of research, you'll find out that the death squads that were there to sort of stymie any sort of political influence again, you know, for the rebels and such like that. They were trained, financed, and basically set up and organised by the CIA. Noam Chomsky basically described Salvadorian-backed death squads, and he said that draftees were made to kill dogs and vultures by biting their throats and twisting their heads off. right? Then they had to watch as soldiers tortured and killed suspected dissidents, tearing out their fingernails, cutting off their heads, and chopping up their bodies and playing with the dismembered arms for fun.
So where was this, Neil?
This is in El Salvador.
El Salvador.
Yeah, but basically the similar thing was happening in Nicaragua as well, and basically it came out in 1984 that the CIA, all these horrific atrocities, organised rapes, organised torture of children, mass executions, mass tortures, cannibalism, and all this sort of thing. It was basically in a CIA manual entitled Psychological Operations in Guerrilla Warfare.
So would the people who were doing all of these grotesque acts, would they be under mind control? Is that
Well, this is the thing, and this is another interesting point, okay, is that to get somebody to do these acts, which are essentially inhuman, you have to systematically desensitise them. And this is completely aside, but I noticed the other day that we were talking about fast-tracking people from the army into teachers, like, at schools. That's what we want. We want somebody that's been systematically desensitised to the point that they can put a bayonet into another human being. That's who I want teaching my kids. Come on. What's wrong?
Now, you mentioned Henry Lee Lucas.
Yes.
Now, was he part of Project Phoenix?
Well, no, maybe. I mean, the sort
was he believed to have been programmed?
Yeah, he's a program killer. Basically, what he claimed was he was part of a cult called the Hand of Death that was basically moving people for these sex slave rings and drug couriering and stuff like that between Texas and Mexico. Right. And now...
What year we're talking here?
I forget. I think it was 60s, 70s, to be quite honest. But basically, he's sort of the most... He's killed the most people as far as serial killers.
So he went on to be a serial killer?
Oh, he was an active serial killer. But basically, he
killed
claims
over 300 people?
Yeah, and he claims that he was part of government operations. Now, that sounds kind of crazy and stuff like that, until you discover that basically a bit of research that these ranches that he's talking about actually do exist. The other thing that's very interesting is Henry Lee...
So just ranches where he claims he's been programmed?
Well, basically, where he's been programmed, they're training people for death camps and stuff like that, and, mind control and sex slaves and white slave trade and stuff like that. But basically, he's the only person in the history of the world that's been given a pardon, a stay of execution, by George W. Bush. No one else in the world, Henry Lee Lucas, one of the most notorious serial killers in the world, had his execution overturned at the last minute by executive order of George W. Bush. He's never, ever, showed leniency for anybody else, but celebrity serial killers, apparently they get it. And Arthur Shawcross is the other one. Arthur Shawcross basically came back from Vietnam claiming to be involved in the Phoenix Project. He was then given ridiculously light sentences for murder and carried out murders that were sort of necrophilic, cannibalistic in tendency and stuff like that. Mysteriously, he was let out of prison 10 years early and then went on to commit another 11 atrocious murders.
Well, and there have been other boys, shall we call them, kids you call them, in Columbia and Virginia Tech. These are incidents where someone's gone into a school and just murdered college students.
Absolutely. I mean, this is basically...
And again, you would contend that these people have been in government mind control programs.
Yeah, I think there's certainly an amount of evidence that suggests that either these school shootings were not carried out solely by the perpetrators, and even if they were, that perhaps these have got sort of links to mind control programs and stuff like that. I mean,
would you say that their mind control programs gone wrong, or were they deliberately orchestrating? I mean, we've got one here, Columbine.
Yeah.
How many people were killed in that?
13.
900 rounds.
Yeah.
So were there two shooters in
well, this is the thing. 900 rounds is an awful lot for two shooters, to be quite honest. I mean, there's lots of things. Basically, the Rocky Mountain News at the time quoted Chief Stone, who's like the local sheriff. He says, I've never thought it was just those two, because the amount of stuff that was brought in, but we just do not have enough evidence to charge people. There's a lot of things. Basically, student eyewitnesses reported seeing 3 gunmen. Teachers reported seeing 3 gunmen. Teachers that survived reported seeing 3 gunmen. There were 72 9mm casings found in an area that the boys never went into. Okay, you've got to ask certain questions like, why were the FBI and various other sort of agencies, they never returned a shot. They never entered the building. They stood down for 2 hours and were ordered not to return fire until the shooting had stopped.
So, all right, so you think there's some conspiracy involved in that Columbine killings.
Yeah.
What would be the reason why the CIA or whoever would want to program people to go into a school and do that? There's several things. What's the ulterior motive?
Well, I mean, One of them was basically to disguise the fact that on that day we sent more bombs. I believe it was Sarajevo. I may have got that wrong. There was more missiles launched by the USA that day than ever before in the history of the world. Okay. The other thing is that basically it led to gun legislation. We're going to have to take our guns off you because, you know, we've got these dangerous kids going. Despite the fact that the evidence against the kids is quite shaky as well. There's no fingerprints. 2 fingerprints were found in the entire thing. Eric Harris, who's left-handed, killed himself in the left temple, shot himself in the left temple with his right hand, apparently, because that's where the gun was found.
Right.
You know,
right.
It's all very, very strange, basically. But you know, the other thing is that his father, I mean, this is, again, speculation, his father worked for Lockheed Martin, which was a weapons contractor and such like that, and he lived at Plattsburgh, which, there's an MK Ultra mind control facility there, which is allegedly closed, but a lot of researchers will tell you that they're actually still pumping radio waves and stuff out of there, so there's a suggestion that perhaps these kids were mind controlled. You know, people saw snipers on the roof and stuff like that. One of the things that this immediately set it off for me, there's no film of the kids leaving the bombs in the cafeteria. Apparently, the person who was changing the video went to change it just before they arrived, waited 15 minutes, and then changed the tape. And so we don't see them planting the bombs, we see the bombs there after the tape comes back on. Okay, right. And you know, we're not suggesting that these kids weren't involved or whatever, but if they were probably sort of programmed. The other one is the Virginia Tech thing, which is Sung Hui Jo. Basically, he killed 32 people with no expert training, apparently. He got off 170 rounds from 2 pistols in 9 minutes, which is a shot every 3 seconds. He had a 60% fatality rating, which is higher than special ops. Okay. Right. When the investigators went there, I think it was Charles Meslow, basically, he's a professor of criminology. He examined the scene. He says, well, someone's been at this with an assault rifle because there's so much damage. Like, you know, it's very, very strange. Interestingly, with again, connections to the military, there was pictures of him in a military uniform, a US Marines thing. It was up on Wikipedia, it's been taken down.
Any motive on that particular case? I mean, sometimes in these Manchurian-type cases, there's
terror.
There's one or two people who, you know, they want to... For example, there are theories that the Dunblane case was like that.
I believe so.
There was a paedophile ring which was about to be exposed, so they killed the people who were exposing it.
The other thing was handguns with Dunblane, because basically after Dunblane you couldn't own a handgun, you could only own a .22, because I actually used to be part of a shooting club, and basically after that it just bang, stopped completely. But say at Virginia Tech, I mean, the evidence basically against the fact they did it, again, people reported a large 6-foot person that doesn't match his description. Right. Again, strange killing. Killed himself by shooting himself in the back of the head, destroying his entire face so he could not be identified, which is, again, very strange. He filed down the serial numbers of his guns and yet paid for it on a credit card and kept the receipt in his pocket.
Right, yeah.
What's that about? It's just subterfuge.
Yeah, certain evidence doesn't seem to stack up.
You could also look at the symbolic sort of nature of it as well. And basically, Columbine, Columbia, the goddess, Columns, Columbia, doves and stuff like that. 13 Columbines killed on Hitler's birthday. The symbolism for the Virginia Tech is that 33, which is obviously a Masonic number, 33 virgins were killed in spring. So that's a spring sacrifice of Virginia, you know.
All right.
Possibly.
Okay.
This is,
possibly.
You
know. Now, we'll come closer to home because there is an alleged project called Project Mannequin.
Yeah.
And I've interviewed Miles Johnson, and I've seen some of his videos. He's interviewed a while back a guy called James Casbolt, and another one called Dave Marrow.
Yes.
And you know, what are your opinion of these two guys? You can if you go on Miles Johnson's YouTube website, I think you can watch those 2 interviews.
Yeah,
it's James Casbolt and Dave Marrow.
I think the David Marrow one's on the UK's Monarch project or something like that.
Or Monarch, is it?
Well, that's what it's named on YouTube. But, well, this is the thing. They're very, very, very strange stories. And it's like any of these stories. You know how we were discussing on the previous show? We're all pre-programmed. In my sort of X Factors on tonight, watching the football on Sunday, don't want to be involved in that. It sounds completely bizarre. But, you know, perhaps there's something to it. I mean, it is very, very strange. They're talking about underground bases, and they're talking about extraterrestrials and implants and super soldiers and, you know, various things like that. It's not actually as far-fetched as you might sort of believe. I mean, if you look at sort of, you know, Buddhist monks, you know, Shaolin monks and stuff like that, they can sort of use techniques to make, you know, very, very sort of strange chi force energy things happen. If you look at sort of the history of war, you get people are so on adrenaline and such like that that they don't notice they've lost an arm or a leg or something like that. I mean, it's rare, but it does happen. And perhaps if you could tap into that, you could, or perhaps even using some sort of hypnotic suggestion, you could bypass these things. And so, you know, it's perhaps not as strange as it sounds.
All right. And the Dave Marrow interview, you know, I did think that there was possibly something to that.
Yeah.
He certainly seems a very disturbed
Well,
character.
one of the things that Dave Marrow talks about is the satanic paedophile ring on the Orkney Isles, and basically this is if you research a lot, there's often cases of satanic ritual, you know, child abuse, and every single time it transpires that the kids were all making it up, and they weren't making it up. Okay, by pure coincidence, there was a case it was the Broxtowe case, or it was in Nottingham, which is near to where I live. Now, by pure coincidence, I happen to know the foster parents of the girls that were involved or made the allegations, and they claimed that basically several things. They claimed that these girls were, without wanting to be offensive, not bright enough to make up these really detailed stories, and like all of them kept to the story 100%, talking about being taken into graveyards, into houses and stuff like that, and being made to partake in satanic ritual and sex with adults. And basically they were naming members of the police and members of Parliament, you know, various sort of official people that, you know, really shouldn't be sort of doing this sort of thing. Now again, it was all sort of wiped away and stuff like that. Speaking of these foster parents, basically everybody knew that it happened. They couldn't remember specifically where these houses in the countryside were, therefore they were lying and stuff like that. Even the report says that basically, yeah, these kids were systematically abused.
All right. And we have had, well, very briefly on one of my shows, I featured Barry King, who claims there is a base at a place near Peasmore.
Yeah.
And it's intriguing claims, but my opinion of that theory is that it's probably half true.
Well,
the alien stuff has been added somehow to hide what's really going on.
It's certainly possible. I mean, you've got to sort of appreciate with all of these mind-controlled people, or alleged mind-controlled people, any recovered memories could be a mind-control implant. I know that then we'll get into a really sketchy area of, you know, Matrix style, are we awake, pinch me.
Yeah, I mean, because this is something that they can allegedly do. If they can create different personalities, you said that there's one personality which is the self-destruct one, but there could be the other one which is the, I'm now telling the truth about what happened to me, so it's just a whole load of gibberish comes out, so that no one will ever believe what they're saying.
Exactly. The other thing is that basically there's this thing called MILABs, which is, you know, military abductions. Yeah, if you read Sources of the Illuminati by Jim Keith, what he basically goes through is a lot of cases where during these alien abductions, quite domestic things have been used, like vans and people in military uniforms. And one of the arguments is this sort of William Cooper argument, grand deception sort of argument, that, well, this proves that the aliens are in cahoots with the government. Or alternatively, we could argue, like we were saying before, it's so that people go, if you go to the police and say, some blokes in military uniform kicked off my door last night and kidnapped me, that's a crime. If you go to the police and say, some aliens kicked off my door and kidnapped me, that's taken away by many white coats time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And so you're quite right, it sort of retracts credibility from the story. It doesn't mean that it's not true. I mean, who could tell? You know, this is the point. I happen to believe that, you know, there are aliens, there's alien abductions and stuff like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are that you know.
All right, and Neil, I mean, is there anything else you want to add so that people can sleep well in their beds tonight? Because it's been quite a roller coaster of very dark subject matter. I mean, you know, do you think these programs are going to become more intensive and get worse, or is it, you know?
Well, it depends who you believe. If you research the Montauk Project, Al Bielek says that these are called Montauk boys. Basically, the Columbine attacks, the Virginia Tech attacks, and stuff like this. They're programmed to cause chaos. If you watch Freeman TV, he's got a program called Program to Chaos, and it's, you know, perhaps these sleeper cells, they're termed sleeper cells, which is essentially to sort of come forward for whatever reason.
At a later date?
Yeah, James Casbolt believes...
So the sleeper cell would be someone who's being programmed, they've got this stuff in their heads which can be triggered.
Yeah.
I mean, how long in the future are you talking? Could it be a year or...
Who knows? I mean, basically, James Casbolt claims that he's still on mission and that his programming will kick back in when martial law is declared in America. And this is all the process that is going to happen, and so he will essentially be there along with thousands of others. I mean, Alfred Bielek says there's like nearly 300,000 kidnapped children that were turned into Montauk boys. Right. So these are perhaps...
So martial law happens, these all become footmen of the, controlling Illuminati that have been programmed.
Yeah. Or,
it's an interesting theory.
Well, I mean, every time there's a vacuum, basically, in any political situation, what happens? The man with biggest gun wins. Now, imagine if you as government owned those men with big guns and could sort of, covertly still take over.
Yeah. There's certainly plenty of vacuous information on television, in these times.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, Neil, it's a disturbing interview.
Thank you.
But very thought-provoking, and thanks very much indeed for coming on the show.
No, thank you very much for having me back.
And I'm sure we'll have you on again.
Hopefully.
Okay, so thanks. It just remains for me to say, keep your eyes on the skies, keep your feet on the ground, and tell all your friends about this show. Is that what you would term stress-based trauma then? Or?
Yeah, that is essentially stress-based trauma, but it's more using coercive methods and people's wants to be part of a greater whole. What they would do in the Chinese methods, they would put the prisoners in a cell with several rabid pro-communists who would hate any deviation from the sort of state mandate, and they would let him know with violence and with psychological threats. And essentially, after so many weeks of this, your character becomes moulded to fit the society that you're in. The thing about the Chinese and Korean is that they used no artificial means. It was all to do with human weakness and coercion.
Okay. Now, with people like Mengele in World War II, he was a Nazi who, I believe, went to Argentina after the war.
Yes, yeah.
And his techniques were somewhat more sinister.
Well, basically, he used trauma bonding or trauma. It works like this. If you've ever been in a car crash or you've ever had severe depression or anything like that, you'll find that sometimes you won't remember it. If you were in a car incident, I remember the car swimming out in front of us, and I remember waking up. And what your brain does is it closes off certain parts so that you don't have to relive that trauma again and again and again. Now, if you sort of understand how the brain works, you can manipulate this and you can use it to your own means. And what trauma-based mind control is shattering the mind through trauma, making it dissociate into separate compartments like a honeycomb. Now, what you can do is you can basically implant a personality, or make it seem that each of these compartments is a separate personality, completely separate and unaware of the others. And by that you can cause dissociative identity disorder and basically shatter people.
So Mengele, would you say he was one of the ones who started the trauma base?
He was certainly...
Yeah. He worked with twins a lot, didn't he?
Well,
tell us about that. Why did he need to use twins?
Well, I mean, a lot of people would think that it was to do with genetics and things like that, and it certainly was, but it's a way of using a double-blind test. You've essentially got the same genetic material and you can try the same things out against people. Also, basically, twins have got a very, very, very tight connection, and what he would often do is make twins kill their sibling in front of him.
Really?
And yeah, absolutely. And again, this would cause dissociation.
Yeah.
What's really strange about Joseph Mengele is that he was so successful that he introduced this thing called trauma bonding, which is like a sort of Stockholm syndrome. Many, many years later, even today, survivors of his horrendous techniques will refer to him as Beautiful Joseph. They won't hear a word against him. They think of him as their saviour.
And did he use any medical techniques, do you know?
Yeah, well, he was experimenting with, drugs, barbiturate-induced comas. They basically ran the whole gamut, and this was available to them because obviously they were at places like Auschwitz where they had a regular supply of human experiment, people that they could experiment on. And they've used electroshock, and all these methods were then basically taken across to America and to England and continued by scientists working with the CIA and MI5.
CIA and MI5. In the Nuremberg trials, when the Nazi leaders were on trial, is it Ewan Cameron?
Ewan Cameron.
Ewan Cameron.
Yes.
Tell us about him.
Well, Ewan Cameron was he was actually based in Canada for the majority of his time, and he was interested in a thing called depatterning and psychic driving. Essentially, he sat on the board for the tribunal for Nuremberg prosecuting the German doctors, yes, for their human experimentation, whilst at the same time carrying out exactly the same experiments. What he essentially did was, as we know with Operation Paperclip, a lot of German scientists were moved back to America anyway, and their research.
.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and I'm going to start things off with a comment on previous week's news. The mainstream media are continuing to put out stories about foxes attacking babies and young children. A few weeks ago, I saw on the front page of the Daily Mail the picture of a fox at night climbing over a garden fence where allegedly a child had previously been attacked by a fox. Why this sudden massive increase in evil fox stories? Are foxes really out of control, as our newspapers seem to suggest? It is our view that those in the establishment who wish to re-legalise hunting foxes with dogs are putting these stories on the front pages in order to sway opinion, so that at some point in the near future, when they put forward their proposed change to the law, people are more likely to accept hunting with dogs. These stories are nothing more than a psyops operation. I have no way of knowing whether the stories are genuine. Perhaps they are. But none of them warrant the headlines in the news, British national newspapers, and on BBC main television news. We here on the Starship object to the programming of the public through a controlled British media. If we see in the coming months the government tabling the bringing back of fox hunting, you heard it here first. Kenny McCaskill, who made the decision to release the Lockerbie bomber, has rejected a plea to attend a US Senate hearing. The bomber, Mohammed al-Megrahi, who was convicted in 2001 of killing 270 passengers in 1988 on a Pan Am jumbo, was let out of prison on compassionate grounds because he had cancer and was given just 3 months to live. People are now saying that he could live for 10 years. The request by the Americans for McCaskill to be interrogated about his decision is, of course, total theatre. The real reason why Megrahi was released, which the mainstream media are conveniently ignoring, is that Megrahi's legal team had appealed against the original conviction, and his lawyers have compelling evidence that witnesses lied at the original trial, and that he was framed and is totally innocent. His team is believed to have enough new evidence to overturn the original conviction, which would then cause people to ask the question, who really did blow up the Pan Am jumbo? Some rumours suggest that a certain individual who lost his life on the plane was the target of American intelligence, and that the other 269 murdered passengers were included to disguise their single-targeted individual. If Megrahi had been released because he was innocent, as many people believe he is, this would have been very embarrassing, as a new search for the real perpetrator would begin. So to get round it, they most likely faked his cancer situation in order to avoid the appeal. The Americans now have to keep digging themselves into a deeper hole with more lies, pretending to be annoyed at McCaskill, who was simply a puppet on the end of their evil strings. It's time to introduce this week's guest onto the Starship. And this week, our guest has a degree in psychology and media. He has an MA in electronics and microwaves and that kind of. You've got drugs like LSD and probably a lot of other drugs as well. And then you've got hypnosis.
Yes.
Are there any other? I mean, obviously there's television and media, which is considered mind control. But are there any other techniques?
Well, I think it's just really about manufacturing consent, isn't it? It's not really about facts. It's more about public perception. And if you can make the public perceive something, that in itself is mind control.
Right, so you would call that a psyop?
I would,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay then. All right then, Neil. We're just going to go for a short break, so stay tuned.
The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories. The Rich Planet Starship is sponsored by Geared4.com online bikes, clothing and accessories.
Welcome back on board the Starship, and we're talking with Neil Saunders, who was a researcher of mind control. Now then, Neil, we mentioned the Tavistock Institute, which is a British institute which is responsible for a lot of mind control research, is that?
Yes, it would certainly appear so. Basically, Tavistock is a charitable organisation based in London, although a lot of the funding comes from places like the Rockefeller Foundation.
So when did that start then, Neil?
Well, this essentially started in 1921, so it predates MK Ultra, and it probably predates Korean and Chinese mind control techniques. In 1932, Kurt Lewin took over as directorship, and he was a German psychiatrist who was later taken back to America to start the OSS, which was the precursor for the CIA. So we can see that basically a lot of these organisations appear to be very, very interwoven.
And some people refer to the Tavistock Institute as a secret society.
Well, it's certainly got elements of secret societies in it. I mean, it refers to its psychologist as an invisible college, which basically harks back to sort of, mystery religions and such like that. And also, its principal sort of raison d'etre is to reduce society back to a blank state. What it says is that by introducing terror on a widespread basis in society, it basically reverts to a tabula rasa, or a blank state, where exterior control can be put onto the population. That, to me, sounds remarkably similar to order out of chaos, which you probably know is the Freemasonic.
So would you describe the people who run the Tavistock Institute as like academic elites? Is that
Yeah, no,
and
absolutely.
they thought that they should basically be controlling the plebs.
For the benefit of
plebs
society.
need to be dumbed down and made sure that they're basically controlled.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
So would you say that the Tavistock Institute had kind of a superiority, felt that they were superior to ordinary people?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is entirely what it's about. It's about entraining people in authority, training world leaders.
So they were involved in actually training up-and-coming leaders in psychological techniques
absolutely,
as well.
and applying psychological techniques to society. I mean, essentially, it is using fear to shock people into submission and desensitize them and destabilize them. I mean, Eric Trist, who was the chairman of the Tavistock Institute in 1963, described their work as creating social turbulence. Basically, he said that this will desensitize and destabilize the society, it will lower its ability to critically analyze, and it will mean that basically anybody or whoever should wish to could impose their worldview on the society. He said in 1963 that the world was already, he proudly stated that thanks to Tavistock, the world was already in a state of permanent social turbulence.
Right, and you contend that they deliberately keep it like that in order to best control the people. Is that?
Absolutely. I mean, if you literally just carried on, and it was, it's highly hypocritical that Ewan Cameron was doing exactly the same things to patients, unknowing patients, members of the public, that he was prosecuting Nazis for.
So the CIA got some of their early techniques from the Nazis?
Oh, totally, absolutely. Most of it was based, I mean, they tended to, when it was started in 1953 under the technical service staff with Sidney Gottlieb, they tended to use more LSD at the beginning.
Right.
They found that LSD was a very, very sort of useful drug for this sort of thing.
Well, the Nazis didn't use LSD then?
Not as heavily as the CIA. They were more interested in certain other techniques. But, under Sidney Gottlieb, they were dosing up lots of people, notably Whitey Bulger, the mob boss. He was part of MK Ultra, and he complained about hallucinations, voices in his head, nightmares for years afterwards. That he was personally dosed up by Sidney Gottlieb.
So what would be the CIA's ultimate reason for looking at LSD? Why does the CIA need mind control and LSD? What are they ultimately trying to achieve?
Well, I mean, officially when it was started, it was for things like double agents, truth serums, poisons, and things like that. But also you could use it for hypno-programming, like basically dropping a large amount of information into people's brains and using them as unwitting human computers, spies, essentially. But
So they would then go out into society and say X, Y, and Z, so there would be disinformation agents, effectively.
possibly,
So,
or they could just be used as spies. I mean, one of the notable hypnotists was George Estabrooks. Now, he was basically concerned with hypno-programming during World War II. And one of the things that he said was that basically he can hypnotise any person to do anything without their knowledge or consent. He can hypnotise people to commit treason against their country, completely breaking their moral code, and without their knowledge. And this was later sort of confirmed by another psychiatrist, J.G. Watkins, who actually did experiments with soldiers. What he would do was he would hypno-program a suggestion into their head, and they would attack superior officers in this particular experiment. In one case, an officer ended up getting stabbed. This is how absolutely total the control can be. And George Estabrooks would say that the key to this is to shatter a person's mind, to create multi-personality or dissociative identity through hypnotism. And he's said many times this is not science fiction, he's done it. So, I mean, Ewan Cameron himself was more interested in depatterning, which is essentially using electroshock drugs, drug-induced comas for 65 days at a time, LSD for 60 days at a time, and this would completely wipe the personality, allowing for new patterns to be psychically driven onto the person, and this would be done using embedded headphones and looped messages that you just cannot turn off.
and I mean, we'll come on to it in a later section, possibly programming Manchurian candidates.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely possible, and several psychiatrists have spoken about this, that it is possible.
Okay, well, we're going to talk some more after the break. We're going to talk about the Tavistock Institute a bit more, which you touched on, and psychotronics, which involves microwaves, I believe.
Psychotronics is essentially electronic means of mind control, like exterior electronic means, and well, it could be brain implants, or it could be, wave, ELF, subliminal messages.
So we've got psychotronics, which is electron film studies. He is also studying hypnotherapy and is the lead guitarist of the band Thought Crime. He has spent the last 10 years researching the subject of mind control and how our perceptions of reality are being purposely constructed by exterior forces. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. It's Neil Saunders.
Hello.
Welcome on the Starship, Neil.
Thank you very much.
Did you enjoy the trip?
Oh, very much so, yes.
Good. Now, we're here to talk about a subject which I'm fascinated by, that of mind control.
Yes.
And we've been discussing it, beforehand, and it is a huge subject.
Oh,
isn't
yeah,
it?
it's vast, absolutely vast.
So, could you start by telling us, sort of, when would, sort of modern mind control, when did that all start?
Well, I mean, even that is sort of mired in mystery itself. I mean, officially MK-Ultra, which is the American mind control project for sort of mind-controlled assassins and Manchurian candidates and things like that. That's
MK-Ultra, so why is it called MK-Ultra?
Well, this is where the twist comes in, because the MK comes from a German word for mind control.
Right.
Now, mind and control, then. Essentially, MK-Ultra started under Sidney Gottlieb in 1953. However, basically, it used a lot of techniques that were already in use by Nazis in Auschwitz, Josef Mengele, and such like that. The sort of British arm of mind control would be the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations, which is ostensibly it's a charity organisation funded by Rockefeller, among other people, that deals with crowd control, applying psychological techniques to society, and how to deal with mass brainwashing, essentially. That started in 1921, and in 1932 the directorship was taken over by a gentleman called Kurt Lewin, who was a German psychiatrist, and later he was taken over to America to start the OSS, which was the precursor to the CIA.
Right.
A lot of the techniques were using sort of Operation Paperclip Nazi officers that were brought over to America.
This was after the war.
This was after the war,
Nazi
but obviously
scientists,
this was
yep.
before 1953. So you could assume that basically the official start date of 1953 was probably not. It was probably going on a lot of time before that.
Right.
In fact, if you wanted to research the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there's passages in there that talk about trauma-induced dissociation, using potions to induce comas and spells or hypnotic trance styles to enslave people and essentially make them mind controlled.
Now, the Americans are believed to have used mind control to do with the Korean War.
Well, MK Ultra was a response, officially, it was a response to Korean and Chinese mind control techniques. There was about 7,000 prisoners of war, American prisoners of war during the Korean War, and about 95% of them made full confessions to basically whatever charges were brought against them.
Right. So is this American prisoners or Korean?
This is American prisoners.
American prisoners.
And officially, in 1953, MK Ultra started to try and counteract these Korean brainwashing techniques.
Right.
There was psychiatrist Wolf and Hinkle sent a memo to Alan Dulles in 1953 explaining the Chinese and Korean methods of mind control. And essentially these were using isolation, sensory deprivation, putting people in stress positions so that they can't sleep, battering them with sound, and letting them know that there's no way of getting out of this without confessing to the crime that they're accused of.
Mm-hmm. So